Chapter 420. The first rays of the morning sun dyed the horizon with a faint red glow. Within the red glow, several white clouds gently floated past. Tens of thousands of rays of light shone on the calm New Shui River, emitting a faint halo. Everything seemed so tranquil and peaceful. However, the calm was only on the surface. Under the surface, there were countless undercurrents surging. Suddenly, an undercurrent broke through the calm surface of the water, immediately causing a burst of turbulent waves. Whirlpools spread out in the waves and finally disappeared on the surface. Facing the rays of sunlight, a huge fleet appeared on the New Shui River. Their sails were bulging, and under the impact of the undercurrent, the bows of the ship stirred up bursts of snow-white waves. On the flag that fluttered in the wind, there was a picture of a pure white Pegasus spreading its wings. Obviously, this was the navy fleet of the Eastern House of St. Prospero. Although the weakness of the Eastern Army was well known in the Empire of Radiance, no one dared to underestimate the navy fleet of the Eastern Army. This huge fleet consisted of 15 heavy warships, 180 paddle sail warships, 50 light dhow sailboats, and 300 logistics transport ships. It was definitely the most terrifying naval force of the Empire of Radiance. It was also because of this almost invincible fleet and the natural moat of the New Shui River that the Eastern Army had not been invaded for hundreds of years. Even the powerful northern frontier, which had pressed the giant demon empire to the ground, could not cross the New Shui River under the threat of this fleet. At this moment, the flagship, White Dew, was sailing at the forefront of the fleet. This legendary heavy warship named after the House of St. Prospero was the pride of the Eastern Army. It was also a miracle in the era of wooden warships with sails. This water giant was 80 meters long, 20 meters wide, with a 66-meter keel and a full displacement of 3,000 tons. The ship had 3 floors, and each floor was built with a protective wall that could allow thousands of archers to shoot at the same time. There were 8 huge battering poles on both sides of the ship, and a ferocious bow ram was installed at the bow. In the era of cold weapons, the White Dew could definitely be called an invincible warship that would never sink. At this time, in the captain's room of the White Dew, almost all the senior officers of the Pegasus Navy fleet were present. The supreme commander of the fleet, Earl Hall, swept his dignified gaze across everyone's faces. Then, he coughed lightly and said loudly, "Everyone, I'm sure you all know the reason why we're heading north this time. That's right, it was to go to Silvermoon City and redeem Marquis Vincent. And the price of redemption." At this point, the corners of Earl Hall's mouth twitched a few times as though he couldn't hide the humiliation and anger in his heart. Thankfully, he quickly calmed down and continued. "Let the Earl of Avon explain the price of redemption in person." Earl of Avon, who was standing behind Earl Hall, smiled and took a step forward. He first nodded at the fleet's officers before opening a goatskin scroll in his hand and reading from it. "Ladies and gentlemen, according to the agreement between the Duke of St. Prospero and Count Angeli, we will use 6 heavy warships, 50 paddle warships, and 120 transport ships to ransom Marquis Vincent." Hearing this, even the Navy officers who had always been disciplined couldn't help but whisper to each other. Clearly, such a price was difficult for everyone to accept. They all cast their gazes at Earl Hall, but the supreme commander of the fleet lowered his head and remained silent. However, Earl Hall's tightly clenched fist still showed that his heart wasn't as calm as he appeared on the surface. Earl of Avon slowly swept his calm but firm gaze across the faces of the officers. Only when the scene quieted down again did he continue reading. "According to the request of the Duke of St. Prospero, the following warships will be handed over to the northern frontier: Braveheart, Victory, Raging Waves, Giant Wave, Windchime, White Dew. These 6 heavy warships will." Earl of Avon. Upon hearing this, Earl Hall finally couldn't help but exclaim. He took a step forward and stood in front of the Earl of Avon. His heavy breathing almost hit the young Duke's second son's face. Earl of Avon looked expressionlessly at Earl Hall, who was like an enraged bull, and asked indifferently, "Earl Hall, do you have any questions?" Earl of Avon, it's not that I can't bear to part with a few warships. In fact, everyone knows that I want to see Marquis Vincent return safely to the eastern region more than anyone else. My daughter looks forward to her husband day and night, and my grandson can't leave his father. But what I want to know is, why are the warships chosen from the Hall family? The Hall family's warships? Earl of Avon sneered and asked without backing down, Earl Hall, when did the Pegasus Navy become the Hall family's private army? Of course, the Pegasus Navy isn't the Hall family's private army, but you can't deny the Hall family's contribution to this fleet. Most of our family's income is used to maintain the fleet. The best members of the Hall family, the strongest citizens, all serve in this fleet. Earl of Avon, to say something disrespectful, without the Hall family, the Pegasus Navy's combat power will be reduced by at least half. Earl Hall had already thrown caution to the wind. Earl Evans' actions had already exceeded the bottom line he could bear. If he really handed over these 6 heavy battleships, the Hall family's military strength would be completely finished. Earl of Avon snorted and said unyieldingly, Earl Hall, I admit the Hall family's contribution to the Pegasus Navy, but ask yourself honestly, when has the House of St. Prospero ever let you do anything for nothing? Have you forgotten that your ancestors were just lowly commoners and rich merchants? Who raised your family's title step by step to that of an earl? Who made you one of the top families in the eastern region? You even let your daughter marry the heir of the Duke of the Eastern region. The House of St. Prospero has never mistreated the Hall family. Now that we need you, Earl Hall, are you beginning to forget your oath and the grace of the House of St. Prospero? The Hall family has never forgotten our oath. And we will never betray the House of St. Prospero. Earl Hall said loudly and forcefully, but then he changed the topic and said in a deep voice, but we are also unwilling to be deliberately targeted. Earl of Avon unfolded the parchment in his hand and let Earl Hall see the words on it and the signature of the Duke of St. Prospero. Look carefully, Earl Hall. This is the order of the Duke of St. Prospero. Are you prepared to disobey it? Earl Hall stared intently at the parchment and didn't say a word. However, this silence was already a silent protest. Just as Earl of Avon was about to speak again, he suddenly saw a high-ranking officer take a few steps forward and stand behind Earl Hall. This seemed to be a signal. Right on the heels of that, one officer after another from the Hall family came behind Earl Hall. They also lowered their heads in silence, expressing their silent protest to Earl of Avon. The phrase, the Hall family owns half of the Pegasus Navy, was perfectly interpreted in this scene. However, it was only half. There was another half present. When the officers of the House of St. Prospero saw this, they all stood behind Earl of Avon. The two groups of people faced each other silently. Some of the hot-tempered officers even touched the swords at their waists with their right hands. The air in the cabin became more and more stagnant, gradually becoming suffocating. The situation seemed to have become a string that had been stretched to its limits. It was as if it would completely snap in the next second. Count Elvin looked at Count Hall and the officers behind him expressionlessly. His expression was still calm and composed, as if he didn't realize that a civil war was about to break out in the Pegasus Navy. He asked calmly, "What do you think?" He asked calmly, "Earl Hall, do you wish to betray the House of St. Prospero?" Earl Hall took a deep breath as though he was forcefully suppressing his anger and impulsiveness. He said in a deep voice, "Earl of Avon, I wish to speak to you alone." "Sure." Chapter 421. With the departure of the officers, only Earl Hall and Earl of Avon were left in the cabin. The Earl of Avon rolled up the parchment in his hand and casually placed it on the table. Then, he picked up a cup of cold coffee and drank it. Earl Hall stood quietly by the side. The flush of anger on his face had subsided, and he seemed to have finally calmed down. However, the determination and resistance in his eyes didn't diminish at all. The Earl of Avon put down his coffee cup and turned to look into Earl Hall's eyes. He asked, you should have heard some rumors about Marquis Vincent being assassinated in Silvermoon City, right? Earl Hall nodded. He seemed to realize something as his face suddenly turned extremely pale. Seeing this, the Earl of Avon knew that the other party had guessed it, so he didn't hide it anymore. He sighed and said, "Yes, although the people of the northern frontier have sealed off the news, we still confirmed an unfortunate fact: my dear brother, Marquis Vincent, has died in Silvermoon City." "Impossible!" Earl Hall roared and suddenly became irritable again. His bloodshot eyes stared at the Earl of Avon in front of him as if he wanted to strangle him to death with his gaze. Count Elvin didn't seem to be worried about his own safety at all. His expression was calm and even a little sad as he even said with a hint of sadness, "I also hope that this is fake news, but this is the truth." Colin Angelo was worried that this news would attract revenge from the eastern region, so he sealed the news and deliberately put forward harsh conditions for redemption. He wanted to stall for time and wait for the northern frontier's reinforcements. Unfortunately, news of the orcs suddenly came from the western region. The reinforcements from the northern frontier probably won't be able to reach Silvermoon City. So, Earl Hall, this is also an opportunity for us, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for revenge. Revenge? Earl Hall sneered and said disdainfully, "I think this is a chance for you to completely eliminate the Hall family, right? Eliminate the forces supporting Marquis Vincent and completely control the Pegasus Navy at the same time. Heh, it's killing two birds with one stone." The Earl of Avon shook his head slowly and said, "Purge? No, almost all the nobles of the eastern region were once my brother's supporters. Do you want me to massacre the eastern region? Earl Hall, in my opinion, this is a chance for your family to prove themselves again." Seeing that Earl of Avon still didn't believe him, Earl of Avon continued, "Father should have already made an official announcement, but you haven't received the news yet. My engagement with Prince Leahy's daughter, Salia, has been annulled, and I've been engaged to Count Bruggen's daughter, Grace." Hall's pupils constricted. Before he could say a word, he heard the Earl of Avon continue. "This is the sincerity of the Bruggen family, and also my attitude. I don't want to purge my brother's former supporters, but to accept them. But, just like the Bruggans, I had to see the sincerity of these supporters to switch sides. Especially you, Lord Hall. I know that your daughter married my brother and bore him a child. Don't worry, I won't make life difficult for a child, and I won't treat the Hall family as an enemy because of this. But there's a prerequisite for this: the Hall family has to prove their loyalty." Earl Hall smiled bitterly and asked, "So we can only prove our loyalty through self-destruction? How can it be self-destruction?" The Earl of Avon said in surprise. "It's just a few warships. As long as the Hall family members are still around, the title is still there, and the territory is still there, it's only a matter of time before they rise again. Moreover, I can solemnly promise you that as long as you complete the mission I give you in the next redemption operation, the position of commander of the Pegasus Navy will still be yours." "What mission?" "The Crystal River has a tributary that leads directly to the Half-Elven Palace in Silvermoon City, but there are 3 sluices in the middle." Earl Hall's expression changed, and he immediately continued, "You want me to use the warships delivered to the northern frontier this time to destroy these 3 sluices?" "Yes." Earl Hall couldn't help but sneer as he shook his head and said, "Earl of Avon, after all, you haven't commanded a naval battle before. You don't understand how difficult it is to destroy the 3 sluices. Not to mention the 6 heavy warships and the Orsail warships we handed over this time. Even if we were to mobilize the entire Pegasus Navy, we probably wouldn't be able to destroy the 3 sluices." The Earl of Avon smiled mysteriously and turned to the table. He opened a wooden box placed on it and took out a palm-sized clay jar. "What if we add this?" Earl Hall walked forward in puzzlement, but when he saw the viscous liquid that suffused a green glow in the clay jar, his expression changed drastically as he growled, "That's right." He roared, "Wildfire!" "Yes." The Earl of Avon nodded. The faint green glow from the clay jar illuminated his handsome face, making him look somewhat ferocious. This time, Father has spent a huge price to buy 3,000 jars of wildfire from Yevil. They will help you destroy all the defenses of the half-elves on the Crystal River. 3,000 jars. Earl Hall's voice changed. These things will destroy my fleet as well. Yes, this was your plan to begin with. The Hall family's warships have long been a pile of ashes in your eyes, right? The Earl of Avon seemed to be somewhat impatient as he said coldly, Earl Hall, you don't really plan on handing those warships over to the northern frontier in perfect condition, do you? Their fate is already sealed. I just want them to bring enough enemies to hell with them before they are destroyed. Earl Hall fell silent. After a while, he said softly, is this the price the Hall family has to pay? Yes. As long as we complete this mission, I can guarantee that the Hall family will still have a place in the eastern region in the future. Earl Hall fell silent again. He had a rough understanding of the Duke of St. Prospero's plan. Under the guise of redeeming Marquis Vincent, he would send a batch of eastern region warships along the Crystal River to Silvermoon City. The reason why the northern frontier had sealed off the news of Marquis Vincent's death was probably because they wanted to wait for the eastern region's warships to arrive before forcefully detaining them and handing over a corpse to the eastern region. However, since the Duke of St. Prospero had already confirmed the news of Marquis Vincent's death, he wanted to beat them at their own game. He secretly filled the warships with wildfire and then used a method of mutual destruction to forcefully break through Silvermoon City's naval defenses. This way, the following naval fleets could drive straight into the half-elven palace. However, Earl Hall was also very clear that the mission given to the Hall family by the Duke of St. Prospero was a suicide attack with a slim chance of survival. After this battle, even if the eastern region successfully captured Silvermoon City, the military power that the Hall family relied on the most would be destroyed. Even Earl Hall himself would most likely die in Silvermoon City. If possible, Earl Hall would definitely not accept this mission. Unfortunately, Marquis Vincent was already dead. The Hall family's greatest backer had fallen. Looking at the arrangements made by the Duke of St. Prospero, it was obvious that he was paving the way for his second son, the Earl of Avon. If the Hall family disobeyed this order, they would definitely not be able to escape the House of St. Prospero's reckoning. Thinking of his clansmen who were still in White Dew City, Earl Hall let out a long sigh. He finally took the jar of wildfire from the Earl of Avon and said in a deep voice, All right. All right, the Hall clan will obey your orders. Chapter 422. The night was low, and the silver moon was high in the sky. Viscount Finn, who had been traveling all the way, finally arrived at Silvermoon City again. The residents of the city had long been immersed in their dreams. The streets paved with bluestones were empty. Other than the night squad patrolling back and forth, there was no one else to be seen. Go to Half-Elven Palace, Viscount Finn instructed the coachman in a tired voice. The coachman said with some embarrassment, Sir, it's already so late. I'm afraid it's rude to go to the palace. Viscount Finn lifted the curtain and asked coldly, Are you questioning my orders? No, no. The coachman was so scared that he shrank his head and hurriedly drove the carriage in the direction of Half-Elven Palace. Not long after, the carriage arrived in front of the palace gate. This was Viscount Finn's third visit to Silvermoon City, so the guards at the palace gate naturally recognized him. After careful inspection, they opened the palace gate and let the carriage into the palace. May I ask if Earl Angeli is resting? If not, I would like to pay my respects to him. Wait a moment, I'll help you ask. Okay. After waiting for a while, the attendant returned with a piece of news that Viscount Finn did not want to hear. I'm sorry, Earl Angeli has already fallen asleep. I'll take you to the guest room to rest first. I'll help you inform him tomorrow. Okay. Viscount Finn had no choice but to follow the attendant to his residence. The reason why he was in such a hurry to see Colin was that he wanted to finalize the redemption plan for Marquis Vincent as soon as possible. This way, the Earl of Avon's plan could be implemented as soon as possible. Otherwise, once Emperor Reinhardt's war order reached the eastern region, they would never be able to use force against Silvermoon City again. Otherwise, they would become the public enemy of the nobles of the empire. Therefore, the eastern region was in a race against time. Sir Viscounts, you can rest here tonight. Okay. Viscount Finn sent the attendant away, threw his luggage on the coffee table, took off his coat, and lay on the bed. Although Viscount Fines was already exhausted on the way to Silvermoon City, he was not sleepy at all at this moment. After tossing and turning several times, he still couldn't fall asleep. He simply got up and walked to the window, staring at the shadowy courtyard, lost in thought. The pale, cold moonlight enveloped the half-elven palace. As the night wind blew, the shadows in the flowers swayed incessantly, like ghosts baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. For some reason, Viscount Fines felt a little uneasy. As a trusted aide of the Earl of Avon, he certainly knew the contents of the Eastern region's revenge plan. In his opinion, the plan made by the Earl of Avon was perfect, and it would definitely surprise the half-elves and Count Angeli. However, at this moment, fiendish Viscount suddenly felt that he seemed to have overlooked some important information. With his hands on the beautifully carved window frame and staring at the dark and quiet night, Viscount Finn felt as if he was in an uninhabited wilderness shrouded in fog. He could not see the direction he was going, but there were shadows closing in on him step by step. Anxiety and hesitation surged in his heart uncontrollably. Viscount Finn shook his head and told himself not to think too much. The Earl of Avon's plan would not go wrong. What he needed to do now was to see Colin Angeli as soon as possible and set a redemption plan. Then, he could let the Eastern region's fleet enter the Crystal River smoothly and reach Silvermoon City. After closing the window, Viscount Finn returned to the bed and forced himself to close his eyes. However, as soon as he closed his eyes, the worry and anxiety that he had forcefully suppressed emerged again. After tossing and turning for a long time, he still could not fall asleep. Viscount Finn got up again. This time, he did not stare at the dark courtyard and let his imagination run wild. Instead, he put on his clothes and strode out of the room. Come with me to the palace. Finn woke up the attendant and coachman who were sleeping next door and ordered. The coachman barely opened his sleepy eyes. He kept cursing the damned noble in his heart for being so nosy. However, he did not dare to disobey the order. He could only force himself to pull the carriage over, carry Viscount Finn, and drive towards the palace gate again. When the guard at the palace gate saw Viscount Finn again, he was also confused. Lord Viscounts, it's so late. Are you still going out of the palace? Yes, I couldn't sleep, so I wanted to visit a friend. The guard nodded and did not make things difficult for Viscount Finn. He immediately let him go. After leaving the palace, the carriage went all the way west. Viscount Finn lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked at the quiet street in a daze. Suddenly, another patrol team appeared at the corner of the street. When they saw the badge on the carriage clearly, they did not dare to go forward and ask further. However, Viscount Finn looked at the figure of this patrol team and suddenly realized that he had overlooked something. Blood Cavalry. Where was the Blood Cavalry? Only then did he notice that from the moment he entered Silvermoon City this time, he had not seen the Blood Cavalry again. Whether it was the guards at the city gate, the patrol team on the streets, or the guards at the palace, they were all half-elven Silvermoon Guard. It seemed to be a matter of course that the Silvermoon Guard guarded Silvermoon City. However, Viscount Finn felt a wave of panic because of this. Why did he not see the Blood Cavalry? Speed up. Viscount Finn could not help but urge. Okay. The coachman hurriedly waved his whip. The carriage sped up all the way and soon arrived in front of a luxurious villa in the business district. Without waiting for the attendant to report, Viscount Finn jumped out of the carriage and strode inside. The guards of the villa obviously knew Viscount Finn and did not dare to stop him at all. After a few steps, the butler hurriedly ran over and said with an apologetic smile, "Lord Viscounts, it's so late. Master has already fallen asleep. Why don't I get someone to serve you and rest first? Tomorrow morning, I'll inform Master and let him see you." Viscount Finn completely ignored the butler and strode in the direction of the dormitory. The butler's forehead was sweating and he repeatedly advised, "Lord Viscounts, Lord Viscounts. Master has really fallen asleep." Bang! Viscount Finn kicked open the door of the dormitory. Ah! The two men's screams immediately sounded in the room, followed by Javier's exasperated scolding, "Who is it? Who is it? Finn, Finn Viscounts. Why are you here?" After seeing the face of Viscount Finn clearly, the half-elven merchant's scolding was immediately stuck in his throat. Soon, he reacted and hurriedly said with a flattering smile, "Lord, if you like this half-elven manservant, then I'll avoid him first." "Please, please," Viscount Finn ignored Javier's good intentions and coldly ordered the manservant who was curled up at the foot of the bed, "Get out." "Yes." After the half-elven manservant left, Viscount Finn looked at Javier, who was shrinking his head, and asked anxiously, "What about the blood cavalry? And what about Colin Angelo? Are they still in Silvermoon City?" Javier looked at the unfriendly Viscount Finn and stammered, They don't seem to be here." Viscount Finn grabbed Javier's collar and growled, "What do you mean by, seem to be? Are they here or not? I really don't know. Viscounts, I only heard that late at night 5 days ago, the city gate was wide open. It seemed that a large number of cavalry troops left Silvermoon City, but I don't know if they were the blood cavalry. However, since then, I haven't seen the blood cavalry in the city." Viscount Finn felt a chill envelop his entire body. Then, he was filled with anger and roared again, "Why didn't you send me a letter earlier for such important information?" Javier said aggrievedly, "Lord, I also wanted to send you a letter, but since then, Silvermoon City has been under martial law. The entire city is only allowed to enter and not to leave. Not to mention people, even a messenger pigeon can't fly out. How could I inform you?" Viscount Finn's face twitched a few times. In the end, he threw Javier to the ground. Then, he still felt that he had not vented his anger, so he kicked him a few more times. Javier howled exaggeratedly a few times, then shrank to the side and pretended to be invisible. Viscount Finn paced anxiously in the room. After a moment, he suddenly stopped and asked again, "Where's the palace doctor? Where is he now? I want to see him." What happened to him?" "He's gone." Viscount Finn rushed over angrily. Just as he was about to beat Javier up again, he saw the butler rushing over and helping him out. "Lord Viscounts, a Silvermoon guard is outside and wants to see you." Chapter 423. Viscounts finds, long time no see. Knight Palin, oh no, it should be Viscounts Palin. Viscounts Fines looked at the middle-aged half-elven knight in front of him. He could not help but feel a sense of jealousy in his heart. The last time Viscounts Fines saw Joseph Palin, he was still an unknown wandering knight. He had lost to Carl Miller in the tournament and lost the opportunity to rise to the top in one step. But who would have thought that, under all kinds of coincidences, he would actually rise to the top in one step? An illegitimate child who did not even dare to report his surname, a wandering knight, had risen to become Viscounts of the half-elven kingdom and the commander of the Silvermoon Guard. Even the boldest bard would not dare to fabricate such an encounter. "Viscounts Palin, this man from the eastern region suddenly broke into my house. You must arrest him and interrogate him properly." Javier, whose clothes were disheveled, rushed out and shouted loudly. He looked as aggrieved as he could be. Looking at Javier, who was anxious to distance himself from him, Viscounts Fine sneered and mercilessly exposed him. "That's enough. That palace doctor has been rescued. Do you really think that Queen Aisha does not know about the relationship between you and me? Javier's expression suddenly froze on his face, and then he immediately cried, Viscount Palin, the people from the eastern region forced me to do this. I have never thought of betraying the half-elven kingdom. You must. Shut up. Viscount Palin scolded in annoyance. Javier quickly kept quiet, lowered his head, and shrank to the side. Viscount Palin did not pay attention to the famous half-elven merchant in Silvermoon City. Instead, he turned his gaze to Viscount Fines and said, Viscount Fines, Her Majesty the Queen wants to see you. Viscount Fines smiled faintly and said, I thought Her Majesty the Queen had already fallen asleep. Viscount Palin also smiled and said, she was already asleep, but she was woken up by Princess Sylph. Viscount Fines rolled his eyes, but he could only obediently follow Viscount Palin back to Half-Elven Palace. When he saw Queen Aisha, Fines suddenly felt that Viscount Palin might not have casually made up an excuse just now. That was because Princess Sylph was lying in Queen Elsa's arms. Her big, sparkling eyes were staring at Viscount Fien with bright eyes. Your Majesty the Queen, on behalf of the Duke of Saint Prospero, I would like to extend my sincerest greetings. Queen Elsa patted Princess Sylph's back and asked, Viscount Finn, it's so late. You're still awake. At this time, Viscount Finn had also regained his composure. At least on the surface, he put on the demeanor that an emissary of the eastern region should have. Your Majesty, I've never slept well. I've made you worry. Queen Aisha smiled gently and said, Is that so? It seems that you're the same as Sylph. You're so energetic at night that I can't sleep well. Normally, Viscount Fines would definitely retort when he heard such humiliating words. But now, he could only pretend that he did not hear the offense in the Queen's words and asked, Your Majesty, I wonder if Count Angeli has fallen asleep. Queen Aisha did not answer this question. Instead, she asked, Viscount Fines, do you know why I called you here so late? Viscount Fines could only suppress the anxiety in his heart and said, I don't know. This doctor, Viscounts, you should know him, right? Queen Aisha clapped her hands, and then a figure came in from the back of the hall. Viscount Fines' eyes narrowed. Before he could speak, he saw the palace doctor opposite him kneel down in front of the Queen and point at the Viscount Fines, saying, Your Majesty, it's this person. He's the one who cut off 2 of my fingers and forced me to tell him what happened in the palace. Viscount Fines sneered and immediately denied, Your Majesty, don't believe the nonsense of this lowly person. I've never seen him. Is that so? Queen Aisha clapped her hands again. Viscount Fines turned his head and saw Javier, who he had just seen, being dragged into the hall by the guards. Your Majesty, it's all because of this man from the eastern region. It's all because of him. I never wanted to betray the half-elves. Mr. Javier. Queen Aisha interrupted Javier's wailing and asked, Was it this Viscount Fines who asked you to spy on the news in the palace and kidnap Dr. Cliff? Yes, yes. Javier nodded repeatedly. Viscount Fines could no longer hold it in and said loudly, Your Majesty, I came to Silvermoon City this time to finalize the redemption plan of Marquis Vincent with Count Angeli, not to accept the slander of these 2 lowly people. What's more, you don't have the right to judge me. Queen Aisha looked into the eyes of Viscount Fines seriously and said, Viscount Fines, the identity of an emissary does not mean that you can ignore the laws of the half-elven kingdom. And in the territory of the half-elven kingdom, I have the right to judge anyone. Your Majesty. You are provoking the eastern region. It's the contempt of the House of Saint Prospero. No. I'm just protecting the dignity of the half-elves. Queen Aisha stood up from the throne and announced loudly, Viscount Fines, you have harmed the half-elves and spied on the secrets of the palace. In the name of the half-elven queen, I sentence you to 10 years in prison, Your Majesty. Viscount Fines immediately interrupted, are you deliberately trying to destroy the friendship between the half-elves and the eastern region? Where is Count Angeli? Why didn't he come out to see me? Has he already run away? Queen Aisha looked at Viscount Fines coldly and said, the friendship between the half-elven kingdom and the eastern region is not up to a small viscount like you to decide. As for Count Angeli, he has already set off for Alfalfa City. Alfalfa City? Viscount Fines was confused. Yes. After all, the orcs are about to invade. Count Angeli did not want to wait in Silvermoon City for the safety of the Empire. Instead, he took the initiative to go to Alfalfa City and directly contact the Earl of Avon to resolve the dispute with the eastern region as soon as possible. Viscount Fines had an ominous premonition in his heart. At this time, he finally could not help but ask, how does he want to resolve the dispute with the eastern region? Queen Aisha looked at Viscount Fines and revealed a meaningful smile, if you do something wrong, you have to pay the price. Viscount Fines, just like you have to pay the price of 10 years in prison for what you have done, those from the eastern region who instigated the half-elves rebellion and tried to murder me and Sylph naturally have to pay the corresponding price for this. Viscount Fines retorted sarcastically, Your Majesty, then what price should you pay for your failure to protect Marquis Vincent and let him be assassinated in the palace? Marquis Vincent? Dead? Queen Aisha looked confused. Viscount Fines, where did you hear the news? Viscount Fines immediately looked at Javier and Cliff, who were kneeling on the side, but then he suddenly burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, he laughed so exaggeratedly, so wantonly, as if he had seen the most ridiculous thing in the world. He laughed until he was out of breath, until tears and snot flowed out of his eyes, until he laughed crazily, until he was in despair. So. From the beginning to the end, this was a trap, set up for us. Is it? Colin Angelo, what a good trick. What a good trick. As if worried that Viscount Fines would scare Princess Sylph, Queen Aisha looked at him in disgust. As she walked out with her daughter in her arms, she coldly said, Viscount Fines, you should reflect on yourself in the half-elven prison. Viscount Fines was still shouting, Aisha Miller, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? Queen Aisha said without turning her head. Of course, it's to make some people in the eastern region pay the price for what they have done. Chapter 424. The port of Alfalfa City had been abandoned for many years, but after some simple repairs, it was reopened today. Facing the afterglow of the setting sun, the huge fleet of the Pegasus Navy slowly sailed into the shabby port. Orlando, the president of the Alfalfa Brotherhood, was standing respectfully at the dock with a group of subordinates, welcoming the Navy officers and soldiers who were getting off the ship to rest. The Ragewater River and the Crystal River intersected in Alfalfa City, so if the Pegasus Navy wanted to hand over their warships to Silvermoon City in exchange for Marquis Vincent, they had to pass through here. However, Alfalfa City was the territory of the half-elven kingdom after all. It was reasonable to say that the Pegasus Navy could not dock here without the consent of the half-elven kingdom. But at this time, the mayor of Alfalfa City looked at the densely packed warships in the port and did not dare to say anything. In fact, Ron Lute could not be blamed for not being dutiful because the half-elven kingdom did not have a naval force that could compete with the Pegasus Navy. Of course, they could only watch the people of the eastern region come and go as they pleased. Even the Crystal River, the mother river of the half-elves, was often visited by the Pegasus Navy's warships. If it were not for the sluice, the fleet of the eastern region could even directly enter the half-elven palace along the Crystal River. At this time, the Pegasus Navy only docked in Alfalfa City. In fact, they were already giving face to the northern frontier. After all, they still had to ransom Marquis Vincent, so they could not be too rude. More than 30,000 Navy officers and soldiers poured into Alfalfa City at once, immediately making it very lively. Fortunately, the Pegasus Navy had brought their own provisions. Otherwise, with the poor state of Alfalfa City, it was afraid that it would not be enough for these people to eat. Although Alfalfa City did not have to provide for food and drink, the other physiological needs of the Navy officers and soldiers were helped by the locals. Looking at the scene of wanton indulgence of the soldiers, the Earl of Avon did not restrain them. After all, a war was imminent. Letting the soldiers relax was also good for boosting morale. What's more, the city where they docked was on the east bank of the Ragewater River. In the subconscious mind of the people of the eastern region, this was an absolutely safe place. The fleet's commander, Earl Hall, naturally wouldn't restrain his subordinates. At this moment, he was immersed in a tragic and despairing mood, unable to extricate himself. This time, the warships that were selected to deliver to Silvermoon City would only carry the minimum number of crew members required for normal operations and navigation. After all, he didn't want to bury all of these Navy elites in Silvermoon City. Therefore, Earl Hall was in a dilemma over who to leave on the battleship. Earl Hall looked at the name list placed in front of him and hesitated for a long time. However, he didn't choose a single person. Without a doubt, the people who stayed behind to carry out the mission in Silvermoon City would most likely die. Earl Hall felt that this was probably the most difficult decision he had ever made in his life. Dong dong. Come in. Earl Hall looked up and saw his adjutant, Knight Holmes, walk in and close the cabin door behind him. Your Excellency, aren't you going to have your meal? I'm not hungry yet. Earl Hall replied casually. Seeing that Knight Holmes was still standing at the same spot, he asked, Is there anything else? Knight Holmes hesitated for a moment, but he still gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, Your Excellency, are we really going to follow the Earl of Avon's orders and hand over the family's battleship to the northern frontier? At this moment, the soldiers under Earl Hall still didn't know that they were heading to Silvermoon City not to hand over the battleship, but to blast open Silvermoon City's water defenses. Earl Hall understood that if he were to tell his subordinates the truth now, there would definitely be a large number of deserters or even mutiny. Only when they drove the battleship to Silvermoon City and had nowhere to retreat, could he use Marquis Vincent's death to agitate them or threaten them with the safety of their families to force them to carry out the mission that was no different from suicide. Only then could he carry out the mission assigned by the Earl of Avon and fight for the slim chance of survival for the Hall family. Therefore, when he saw that Knight Holmes was still reluctant to part with the family's battleship, Earl Hall suddenly felt pity and heartache. This is the Duke's order. We have to carry it out. Knight Holmes stiffened his neck and still looked unwilling. Your Excellency, the Duke of St. Prospero is obviously trying to weaken Marquis Vincent's support. If we allow them to hand over these battleships, it's hard to say who will inherit the position of the Duke of the Eastern region in the future. Hearing this, Earl Hall could no longer hide the sorrow in his eyes. He wanted to tell his adjutant that Marquis Vincent was already dead and that the position of the Duke of the Eastern region was destined to belong to the Earl of Avon in the future. But when the words reached his mouth, Earl Hall didn't say it. Earl Hall's hesitation was obviously misunderstood by Knight Holmes, so this loyal knight of the Hall family took a few steps forward and lowered his voice. Your Excellency, we can secretly detain the Earl of Avon and use the House of St. Prospero's battleship to redeem Marquis Vincent from Silvermoon City. Earl Hall shuddered and looked up into Knight Holmes' eyes. Knight Holmes looked back at him without fear and continued to persuade him. Your Excellency, you don't have to worry that this will bring disaster to the Hall family. As long as we get Marquis Vincent back, he will definitely support the Hall family. Moreover, as long as the House of St. Prospero's battleships are handed over to the northern frontier, the Pegasus Navy will be completely controlled by the Hall family. If the Duke of St. Prospero doesn't want the northern frontier to take advantage of the situation, not only will he not dare to blame you, but he will also have to appease you. And in this way, even if the Duke of St. Prospero wants to change his heir, he will have to consider the Hall family's attitude. As long as we successfully push Marquis Vincent to the position of the Duke, the family's position in the eastern region can even be improved. Earl Hall remained silent. Actually, He knew very well that Knight Holmes was right. But this plan had a prerequisite: Marquis Vincent had to be alive. Only then would the Hall family have a future. Otherwise, whatever the Hall family did to the Earl of Avon would not be punished for the time being, even if it was to resist the northern frontier. But in the future, when the Earl of Avon inherited the position of the Duke of the Eastern region, no, there was no need for the Earl of Avon to inherit the position of the Duke. As long as the situation stabilized and the threat of the northern frontier was eliminated, the Hall family would definitely be dealt with. Knight Holmes looked at the silent Earl Hall and thought that he could not make up his mind, so he said again, "Your Excellency, I have secretly tested the attitudes of most of the Hall family's officers. They have all expressed that they will support you unconditionally. So, as long as you give the order." "Enough." Earl Hall interrupted Knight Holmes. "The Hall family will not go against the orders of the Duke of St. Prospero. You can leave. I'll pretend that I never heard these words. Your Excellency, get out." Knight Holmes's face was full of unwillingness, but he did not dare to disobey Earl Hall's orders. He could only leave indignantly. Earl Hall looked at Knight Holmes's back as the sorrow in his heart intensified. Looking down at the name list in front of him, Earl Hall could not bring himself to write. In fact, the Earl of Avon had already given a principle for choosing who to carry out the mission: choose those who had families. Only those who had families would risk their lives in a desperate situation instead of running away. Earl Hall closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he finally became resolute again. He picked up the quill and began to draw on the name list. A moment later, the name list of the people who would carry out the mission was set. Earl Hall felt an endless wave of exhaustion. He staggered out of the cabin and came to the deck. He looked at the deep river alone in a daze. It was already dark. Other than a few soldiers on duty, the rest of the people on the battleship had already come ashore to rest and relax. The lights and noise on the shore were a stark contrast to the coldness on the battleship. Earl Hall silently looked at his reflection in the water. No one knew what he was thinking. As time passed, as if it was an illusion, Earl Hall felt that the face reflected in the water resembled Marquis Vincent's. But then, the reflection in the water emerged from the water and grinned at Earl Hall. "Earl Hall, are you looking at the scenery?" Chapter 425. Earl Hall stood rooted to the ground, thinking that he was hallucinating. But the reflection in the water spoke again. "There's no one else up there, right?" Earl Hall shook his head in a daze. Then, the reflection in the water leaped out of the water. Using the ship's hull as a foothold, he landed on the deck. At this moment, Earl Hall snapped back to his senses and realized that the person standing in front of him was the real Marquis Vincent. "Marquis. Lord Marquis. You're still alive." At this moment, Earl Hall was like a traveler who was walking in the desert and was about to die of thirst when he suddenly discovered an oasis. His only extravagant hope was that everything in front of him wasn't a mirage. "Of course I'm alive," Marquis Vincent said with a chuckle. Seeing that Earl Hall was still in a daze, he pointed at his wet clothes and said, "Do you have clean clothes? It's quite cold at night in late autumn." Yes, of course." Earl Hall nodded repeatedly. Only then did he suppress the ecstasy and excitement in his heart. He carefully led Marquis Vincent to avoid the soldiers on duty on the ship and arrived at his room. After Marquis Vincent changed his clothes, Earl Hall finally couldn't suppress the excitement and puzzlement in his heart. He asked anxiously, "Lord Marquis, what's going on? Earl of Avon told me that you were assassinated in Silvermoon City." Marquis Vincent sneered and said, "I was indeed assassinated, but thanks to my lord's mercy, I survived. However, it was also because of this assassination that I finally saw the true colors of my good brother." Earl Hall's expression changed as he immediately reacted and said, "Could it be that the assassination you encountered was planned by Earl of Avon?" "That's right. Although the one who did it was Duke Modwin, the one who assisted in the assassination was Knight Thomas Fine. Knight Thomas? Didn't he already, during the Battle of Silvermoon City last year? No, he only violated his knight's oath and surrendered to the northern frontier. Apparently, Evan used some method to contact him again. Earl of Avon nodded and said matter-of-factly, after all, he's a knight of the Fines family. I'm not surprised at all that he was encouraged by Earl of Avon. He has paid the price for his stupidity. Marquis Vincent sneered and then said, okay, let's not talk about him. I came to see you this time because I heard the news of Evan's engagement with Count Bruggen's daughter. Looks like father has completely given up on me, right? I think so. After all, the Earl of Avon insisted that you were assassinated in Silvermoon City. Of course he would say that. Marquis Vincent sneered. If not, why would my father be so determined to help him purge the forces that support me? At this point, Marquis Vincent looked at Earl Hall seriously, and asked in a deep voice, the Bruggen family should have been subdued by Evan, then what about the Hall family? As the family closest to me, my father and Evan wouldn't let you go so easily, would they? Of course not. Earl Hall finally found an outlet to vent the anger that had been suppressed in his chest for a long time. All the warships that were chosen to redeem you are the Hall family's warships. Furthermore, Evan had no intention of handing these warships over to the northern frontier. Instead, he was prepared to use them to blast open the 3 sluice gates in Silvermoon City. How is that possible? If they collide with the sluice gates of Silvermoon City, only the warships will be destroyed. But what if the warships are filled with wildfire? Wildfire? Marquis Vincent was shocked. That's right. Lord Marquis, to be honest, there are hundreds of cans of wildfire hidden under your feet. If we're not careful, we'll be smashed to pieces. Marquis Vincent couldn't help but gulp. Even though Colin had told him that some fatal injuries could no longer take his life after becoming an apostle of the Blood Angel, Marquis Vincent really didn't think that he could survive if he was burned to ashes by wildfire. How ruthless. Yes, Lord Marquis. Earl of Avon is forcing our Hall family to perish together with Silvermoon City. Marquis Vincent's eyes flickered as he said, then you're willing to be manipulated by him? So what if I'm unwilling? Earl Hall smiled bitterly, but then he looked at the lively Marquis Vincent in front of him and became excited again. He said in a deep voice, but with your support, it'll be completely different. Lord Marquis, I promise you that as long as you stand out, the warriors of the Hall family will definitely follow closely behind you and clear all obstacles in your way. Marquis Vincent stared into Earl Hall's eyes and asked seriously, are you sure that the soldiers of the Hall family are still willing to fight for me? Of course. Earl Hall said without hesitation. Perhaps you don't know, but those fellows just encouraged me to detain the Earl of Avon and use the warships of the House of Saint Prospero to redeem you. A hint of joy appeared in Marquis Vincent's eyes, but he didn't relax. He stared into Earl Hall's eyes and asked again. He looked into Earl Hall's eyes and asked again, then what if I want to cooperate with the northern frontier? Earl Hall was stunned. Only then did he realize that he had been too excited about Marquis Vincent's resurrection. In his ecstasy, he had overlooked an important question: how had he escaped from Silvermoon City? At this moment, upon hearing Marquis Vincent's question, Earl Hall finally understood that he had not escaped, but had been released. Earl Hall took a deep breath and asked, Lord Marquis, what kind of agreement did you reach with the northern frontier? Marquis Vincent looked at Earl Hall with interest and asked with a smile, what if I've already given the eastern region to Colin Angelo? The corners of Earl Hall's mouth twitched a few times as he advised, Lord Marquis, you don't have to give such conditions. Now that the Orc invasion is imminent, even if the worst happens, the northern frontier won't be able to swallow the entire eastern region in time. Marquis Vincent laughed and patted Earl Hall on the shoulder, comforting him, all right, I won't joke with you. Earl Angelo doesn't have such a big appetite, and I'm not that stupid. Then what are his conditions? Marquis Vincent paused and said in a deep voice, the eastern region, change to a duke. What? Earl Hall opened his mouth wide, his face full of shock. Marquis Vincent's eyes flashed with a strange light as he said coldly, "The northern frontier needs a friendly duke of the eastern region, and father is old and muddle-headed. It's time for him to give up his position. Otherwise, his wrong decision will only intensify the conflict between the eastern and northern frontier, until an inevitable war." But Earl Hall's heart was in turmoil, but when he looked at the sullen Marquis Vincent, he realized that there was no way out for him. The Duke of St. Prospero and the Earl of Avon clearly wanted to exterminate them, so why couldn't the Hall family resist? Originally, he didn't dare to resist because resistance was a dead end, but if he obeyed, at least the Hall family would have a chance of survival. But now, with Marquis Vincent, the Hall family immediately had the confidence to resist. With this in mind, Earl Hall's heart gradually calmed down. His eyes turned resolute again as he said in a deep voice, "Good. Lord Marquis. The Hall family will always stand behind you." Marquis Vincent revealed a satisfied smile and said, "Earl Hall, you've made the right choice." Chapter 426. The night sky of Alfalfa City was very dim, and there was no moonlight at all. On the New Shui River, it was also pitch black. Only the warships of the Pegasus Navy emitted a little light. However, Alfalfa City was brightly lit and bustling, especially in the eastern district where the port of the Pegasus Navy was. Tens of thousands of Navy officers and soldiers poured into the city at once. They opened their money bags, ate, drank, and indulged themselves. It was a grand carnival. The Earl of Avon did not indulge himself. He declined the two beauties sent by the Alfalfa Brotherhood and buried himself in writing in the quiet study. Not long after, his personal attendant, Adam, walked in quietly and handed a sheepskin scroll to Count Evan while reporting at the same time, "Lord Evan, you're still alive." He then reported, "Sir, this is the list of personnel that Earl Hall has confirmed to carry out the mission. Please take a look." The Earl of Avon took the list and scanned it briefly. He then put it aside and asked, "What is Earl Hall doing now?" "Earl Hall is gathering the officers on the list. He should be preparing to explain the matters of this trip to Silvermoon City." "I understand." The Earl of Avon nodded and said, "When they are done with their discussion, have Earl Hall come to see me." "Yes, sir." The Earl of Avon was about to lower his head and continue writing when he saw that Adam had not left. He asked, "Is there anything else?" The attendant immediately reported, "Sir, Orlando has also gathered the leaders of the Alfalfa Brotherhood, but I don't know what they are doing." The Earl of Avon frowned but did not care too much. He casually ordered, "Go and ask them what they are doing. Have Orlando come to see me while you are at it." "Yes, sir." Adam then bowed and left. In an abandoned church not far from the port of Alfalfa City, more than 100 leaders of the Alfalfa Brotherhood gathered. Seeing that everyone was basically present, President Orlando cleared his throat to attract everyone's attention. The scene slowly quieted down. In fact, compared to the former President Capone, Orlando's prestige in the Alfalfa Brotherhood wasn't that high. After all, he didn't have Capone's extraordinary strength, and was able to subdue those unruly small leaders. Fortunately, Orlando had the support of the Earl of Avon, so even if everyone was not convinced by the new president, they would not challenge his authority, especially now that the Eastern Navy fleet was docked in Alfalfa City. "I know you've been having a hard time recently." Orlando's first sentence made all the gang leaders secretly nod their heads. Since the Earl of Avon had already regarded Alfalfa City as his property, he was prepared to control the underground forces here and restore the city to normal order. However, this would obviously make the gang members who were used to swindling and robbing feel uncomfortable and even dissatisfied. But under the deterrence of the Eastern Army, even if they were dissatisfied, they could only hide this dissatisfaction in their hearts. Now that Orlando had pointed it out, everyone immediately began to whisper to each other and talk about it. Orlando raised his hand and gestured, saying again, "To tell you the truth, I'm also not used to this kind of life of being controlled. This sentence made Orlando gain a lot of approval, and a few straightforward fools even applauded. Orlando smiled slightly and raised his voice, continuing, "The reason we came to Alfalfa City is because we don't want to pay taxes, we don't want to be controlled, and we don't want to be controlled by the aristocrats. Whether it's the Eastern Army, the Northern Frontier, or the Half-Elf Kingdom, don't even think about occupying this city. This is our city. No matter how poor or chaotic it is, it's our paradise." Good. Well said. Aristocrats, get out of Alfalfa City. A few of the instigated fools suddenly clamored loudly. But more people just looked on coldly. When the fools saw that no one responded, they immediately became embarrassed. Then, they realized what kind of consequences Orlando had just said would lead to. The Eastern Army's fleet was still in Alfalfa City's port. If these words were to reach the ears of the Earl of Avon, then Alfalfa City would definitely be set off a reign of terror, and the new president of the Alfalfa Brotherhood would certainly meet a miserable end. So, the scene quieted down again. Orlando didn't care about it at all, as if he didn't realize the consequences of what he had just said. Some of the gang leaders who were already dissatisfied with Orlando began to sneer inwardly. They planned to inform Count Evan of this matter after they got out of this place. When the time came, the Alfalfa Brotherhood would definitely have a new president. Moreover, if they could get the appreciation of the Earl of Avon, then the position of the new president might fall on their heads. There should be a lot of people who are already preparing to report me, right? Orlando clearly saw through the minds of some people and bluntly exposed them. However, these words didn't cause too much of a stir. Most of the gang leaders looked at Orlando as if they were looking at a dead man. Although they didn't want to see Alfalfa City return to normal order, they wouldn't jump out and provoke the Eastern Army at this time. Orlando's behavior was a fool in their eyes. "I'm not afraid of you reporting me." Orlando smiled and said calmly, "Because the Earl of Avon can't even protect himself." Looking at the confident face of Orlando, the complexion of the gang leaders changed a little. Someone couldn't help but ask, "Sir Orlando, what news did you get?" Before Orlando could speak, he saw a figure appear at the door. He frowned and was just about to scold the guard for letting someone in, but when he saw the other party's face, he immediately put on a smile and said, "I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. Mr. Adam, why are you here?" As the personal attendant of the Earl of Avon, Adam was certainly a character who couldn't be offended in the eyes of the Alfalfa Brotherhood. So, everyone present stood up and greeted Adam. "Since it's so lively here, the Earl sent me to see what's going on." Adam smiled and nodded to the crowd. The gang leaders suddenly showed a look of schadenfreude. Just as they were thinking about whether to expose Orlando's disloyalty to Adam, they heard Orlando speak first. "Mr. Adam, we're discussing a problem." "Oh. What problem?" Orlando slowly approached Adam with a flattering smile on his face and said, "We're discussing who the master of Alfalfa City is." Adam thought that the other party was going to flatter the Earl of Avon again, so he felt a little proud and disdainful. "Then, have you come to a conclusion?" "Of course." Orlando walked to Adam and said, "This Alfalfa City doesn't belong to anyone." Whoosh! A silver light flashed. Adam was still shocked by Orlando's words when he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his throat. Seeing Adam fall down holding his throat, everyone present realized the seriousness of the matter. "Orlando, are you crazy?" Orlando casually wiped the dagger in his hand on his clothes and said indifferently, "I've said it before, it's not the Earl of Avon's turn to give orders to Alfalfa City." Just when everyone thought that Orlando had really gone crazy, a loud noise suddenly came from outside. Boom! The powerful shock wave shook the chandelier on the ceiling violently, and fine dust rustled down. Is it an earthquake?" someone asked in bewilderment. Orlando pointed to the port outside the window that was ablaze and said with a smile, "Gentlemen, chaos has begun. This is the battlefield you're most familiar with. The pay, swords, armor, and money of the Pegasus Navy are all beckoning to you. What are you waiting for? After saying that, he laughed and left, leaving behind a group of gang leaders who looked at each other in bewilderment. Chapter 427. Boom! The Earl of Avon, who was in the study, was startled by the earth-shaking explosion. He was stunned for a full 3 seconds before he hurriedly rushed to the window. Then, he saw a scene that he would never forget for the rest of his life. There was a heavy warship docked at the port, half of which was already shrouded in green flames. A large amount of river water poured in, causing the bow of the warship to lose its balance. Everything on the deck involuntarily slid to the stern. Even though he was thousands of meters away, the Earl of Avon could hear the screams of the Navy soldiers who were swallowed by the green flames flying in the air. Finally, under the Earl of Avon's sluggish gaze, the bow of the warship was almost perpendicular to the surface of the river. It then slowly sank into the cold river water, leaving a huge whirlpool on the surface of the water. This whirlpool also caused the warships docked at both sides to be attracted closer. The commander of the warship shouted loudly, wanting to lift the anchor and sail away. However, it was impossible to complete the operation in such a short time. In the end, they could only collide with the warships nearby. The huge collision caused serious damage to the side of the warship, and perhaps because of the collision, one of the warships exploded again. The turbulent green flames were like an evil dragon that had been awakened from a deep slumber. It ferociously tore apart the fragile body of the warship and scattered its anger to the world. Boom! In an instant, the green light burst out, lighting up half of the night sky of Alfalfa City. Everyone looked at this scene with horror, not knowing what to do. The Earl of Avon was the first to react. He immediately shouted, "Adam! Adam! My lord, Mr. Adam went to the Alfalfa Brotherhood and hasn't returned yet." A middle-aged knight pushed the door open and explained. The Earl of Avon looked at the captain of his personal guard and calmed down a little. He hurriedly said, "Fletcher, immediately send someone to the port and see what's going on there." "Yes." Knight Fletcher immediately responded. However, before he could turn around to arrange it, he saw the Earl of Avon hurriedly walking to the door. He said, "Forget it, I'll go myself." "My lord. I'm afraid the port isn't very safe right now. Let me send someone over." However, the Earl of Avon didn't seem to have heard Knight Fletcher's dissuasion and rushed out without looking back. Knight Fletcher had no choice but to quickly follow. Bang! A Navy officer violently kicked open the tightly shut door. Ignoring the disheveled woman inside, he roared at his subordinates, "What are you doing? Hans! Your vacation is over. Return to the warship immediately." The soldier named Hans scrambled up from his bed. His face was full of shock. It was obvious that he had been frightened by the huge commotion outside. Just as he was about to ask his commanding officer what had happened, he turned around and saw that his commanding officer had already disappeared. Hans put on his clothes as fast as he could. Just as he was about to leave, he was stopped by the woman on the bed. Of course, he didn't think that the other party had already developed feelings for him and couldn't bear to let him go. Instead, he realized that he hadn't paid yet. After casually tossing out a few copper coins, the woman finally let go of his hand with a smile. Hans rushed out of the door and saw that the street was in a mess. There were frightened people everywhere. Hans looked around but still didn't see the figure of his commanding officer. However, he saw a person who was also wearing the Pegasus Navy uniform. He didn't think much and immediately walked over. "Brother! What the hell is going on?" "I don't know." The man glanced back at Hans but didn't stop. "Let's return to the warship first." Hans quickly followed and continued to ask, "Did the people from the northern frontier attack us?" The man sneered and said, "How did the people from the northern frontier attack us? Do they have a ship?" Hans scratched his head and felt that it made sense. Just as he was about to ask again, he saw a woman with disheveled hair rushing towards him. "Help! Help!" Hans saw the two big men chasing after the woman. He thought that he understood what had happened. Just as he was about to scold them, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his waist. He looked down and saw that the pitiful and weak woman had stabbed a dagger into his waist with a ferocious expression. Hans roared and kicked the woman away. However, the sharp pain in his waist made him involuntarily take a few steps back and fall to the ground. Before he could warn his companions to be careful, a few more people rushed out from the shadows of the alley and surrounded his companions. The two big men who were chasing the woman quickly rushed in front of Hans and began to search his body. Seeing that they took away his money pouch, military uniform, and even the silver medal that he regarded as a treasure, Hans finally couldn't help but growl. "Do you want to die? You actually dare to rob the Pegasus Navy?" The big man grinned and said disdainfully, "You Pegasus Navy can't even protect yourselves. Do you really think that you are the master of Alfalfa City?" The woman also got up from the ground and ruthlessly kicked Hans a few times in retaliation. Then, she arrogantly said, "Let me tell you, brat. This is the real Alfalfa City. A place where scoundrels and scum gather. You nobles' lackeys shouldn't even think about occupying this place." Hans endured the sharp pain in his body and the humiliation in his heart. An absurd thought emerged in his mind. Could this be a conspiracy of the Alfalfa Brotherhood? How could those dregs put the Pegasus Navy into such a sorry state? Of course it's not the Alfalfa Brotherhood. The Earl of Avon quickly moved towards the port while speaking to the attendant who came to report. "The Alfalfa Brotherhood doesn't have this ability. But Sir Earl, Orlando really killed Mr. Adam in front of everyone. He also said that our Pegasus Navy is facing an imminent disaster." The Earl of Avon didn't bother to pay attention to his attendant this time. He just kept his head down and strode forward. In his opinion, the Alfalfa Brotherhood was just a group of scum who couldn't do anything right. He could let them take advantage of the chaos and fish in troubled waters, but to let them plan such an attack on the Pegasus Navy was really overestimating them. The crux of the problem now was the port. As long as the explosion at the port stopped, as long as the Navy calmed down, the Alfalfa Brotherhood who was taking advantage of the situation would immediately shrink into the shadows and tremble. So, what exactly happened at the port? Others might not know what the explosion and the green fire were, but the Earl of Avon knew very well. At this time, he only hoped that this was an accident and not. Soon, the group arrived at the port. The Earl of Avon immediately grabbed a flustered officer and questioned, "Where's Earl Hall? Let him come and see." Boom! Suddenly, a huge fireball exploded in front of the Earl of Avon. The huge blast caused everyone to be blown away. Only the Knight Fletcher didn't fall down because of his strong physique. However, the unprepared Earl of Avon fell flat on his face. With the help of the guards, the Earl of Avon finally got up. He looked at the port that had become a sea of fire in front of him almost numbly. His heart kept sinking. This can't be an accident. Chapter 428. "My lord, we must leave immediately. It's too dangerous here." Knight Fletcher tried to persuade the Earl of Avon to leave, but the Earl of Avon stood still. He looked at the warship in front of him that was engulfed in a sea of fire. Knight Fletcher looked back and recognized the warship engulfed in green flames. It was the flagship of the Pegasus Navy, the White Dew. The symbol of the House of St. Prospero, the invincible existence on the raging water river, the pride of millions of people in the eastern region, the core support and spiritual sustenance of the Pegasus Navy. It slowly turned into ashes in front of them. Such a terrible scene was simply an unreal nightmare for all the people in the eastern region. "The Hall family has rebelled. The Hall family has rebelled." A mournful voice pulled the Earl of Avon back to reality. He looked in the direction of the voice and saw a soldier covered in green flames struggling to climb out of the water. He screamed and rolled on the ground, trying to put out the flames on his body, but it was in vain. This kind of terrifying green flame could not be extinguished even by water. The slightest touch from the flame would almost certainly lead to the end of being burned to ashes. A large number of Navy officers and soldiers who had returned from the city had gathered near the port. They stared blankly at the port that was like a fiery hell, completely at a loss. When they heard that the Hall family had rebelled, many people turned their eyes to the Earl of Avon, wanting to confirm the authenticity of the news. The Earl of Avon looked coldly at the sea of fire in front of him. There was no longer any hope in his heart. He found that all the warships that had burned down belonged to the house of Saint Prospero. The Hall family's warships had already weighed anchor and deliberately distanced themselves from the burning warships to avoid being affected. If this was not premeditated, then it was a ghost. Obviously, the Hall family had rebelled. They had used the wildfire, which was supposed to be used to deal with the sluice gate of Silvermoon City, on the house of Saint Prospero's warships. But how could the Hall family be so bold? Did they not want to have a foothold in the eastern region? The Earl of Avon had no time to think about the reason for the Hall family's rebellion. A surge of anger exploded in his chest, almost drowning his reason. In his fury, the Earl of Avon opened his scarlet eyes and roared in a hoarse voice. The Hall family betrayed the eastern region, they should be punished. This sentence was very domineering, but it did not help the current situation. At this time, the heavy warships of the House of Saint Prospero were all swallowed by the terrible green flames. Although many light warships had survived, it was impossible for them alone to defeat the Hall family's fleet. As long as the soldiers of the eastern region had some sense, they would understand that at this time, the Hall family had the final say on the new Shui River. Then, what could Count Elvin use to kill the rebels of the Hall family? Of course, if the Earl of Avon was talking about the old, weak, women, and children that the Hall family had left in White Dew City, then there would be no problem. But doing so would only be venting his anger. It would not only not be beneficial to the situation, but it would also be harmful. Perhaps the Hall family would simply seek refuge with the northern frontier in a fit of anger. If the northern frontier were to gain control of the raging water river. This thought flashed through everyone's minds, but it was enough to make them tremble in fear. The Earl of Avon obviously understood the seriousness of the matter, and immediately roared again. Whoever kills the Hall family, I will personally give him the title of Viscount. These words immediately caused a commotion. Even though they knew that this was a mission with a slim chance of survival, the temptation of a title still inspired many of the soldiers' courage. They immediately ran in the direction of the light warships that had not yet been burned, trying to become heroes who could turn the tide. The Earl of Avon's expression relaxed a little, and immediately arranged for a few people to go to the nearby cities to ask for support. He also sent someone to White Dew City to send a letter to inform his father of the situation in Alfalfa City. At this time, more and more Navy soldiers gathered in the port, but because a large number of warships had been burned, even if they wanted to fight to the death with the Hall family, they had nowhere to go. Moreover, the Alfalfa Brotherhood's riot was getting more and more intense, and they had even begun to attack the port in an organized manner. In fact, when Orlando announced that the Pegasus Navy could not protect themselves, it was the perfect time to loot a burning house. Many of the Alfalfa Brotherhood were still skeptical. Some of the bolder ones only dared to loot the lone Navy soldiers, but as the warships in the port sank one after another, the Alfalfa Brotherhood became bolder and bolder. At this time, they finally confirmed that the Pegasus Navy could not protect themselves, so they completely let go of their hands and feet and prepared to loot wantonly. If it was in normal times, the Pegasus Navy would not put a bandit organization like the Alfalfa Brotherhood in their eyes no matter how many people they had. Even if the Pegasus Navy was not good at land warfare, they were still a regular army after all. Dealing with a group of bandits with only brute force and courage was not a problem at all. But now, the Pegasus Navy had a big problem. The rebellion of the Hall family had caught them by surprise. They had to find ways to save the surviving warships and deal with the rebellious Hull family fleet. At this time, they were somewhat powerless against the Alfalfa Brotherhood. The Alfalfa Brotherhood obviously saw the weakness of the Pegasus Navy. They were the kind of people who liked to bully the weak and fight battles with the wind. This time, they were even more energetic and crazily attacked the port position. The Earl of Avon did not look back at the seemingly arrogant Alfalfa Brotherhood because he knew that these people only looked scary. As long as the Pegasus Navy blocked their strongest waves of attacks and caused a certain number of casualties, the scattered soldiers would inevitably lose their momentum. Even if they did not retreat, they would not dare to attack again. The real danger was still on the raging water river. At this time, more than a dozen light sail warships had already sailed out of the port and rushed towards the Hull family fleet. However, their charge felt like moths flying into a flame. In a naval battle, the difference in tonnage was almost impossible to make up for. But the Earl of Avon still stared in the direction of the raging water river, hoping for a miracle to happen. However, reality was always cold. Not only was there no miracle on the raging water river, even the Alfalfa Brotherhood behind him was getting braver and braver as they fought, constantly compressing the defensive position of the Pegasus Navy. The Earl of Avon looked back in bewilderment, only to discover that the Alfalfa Brotherhood's offensive was so fierce because there were hundreds of extremely brave professionals mixed in with them. Not only were there high-grade warriors, there were even knights. How was this possible? The Earl of Avon immediately realized that there must be a powerful force behind the Alfalfa Brotherhood's rebellion. Associating it with the Hull family's rebellion, the Earl of Avon felt that he had already fallen into a trap carefully designed by others. He felt as if the world was spinning around him, and then his vision went black as he fell backward. "My lord!" Knight Fletcher hurriedly caught the Earl of Avon, but he looked around and knew that the situation was hopeless. He clenched his teeth and supported the Earl of Avon, hiding in the darkness. After they left, a voice suddenly sounded, "Saint Prospero Evan has run away." Chapter 429. Count Avon woke up slowly after a series of shaking. He looked at the dark alley and instinctively wanted to scream, but he heard Knight Fletcher's familiar voice, "Sir Earl, you're awake." Only then did Count Elvin relax a little, and he hurriedly asked, "Where are you taking me? What about the Pegasus Navy? Has Earl Hull's rebellion been quelled?" Knight Fletcher opened his mouth and sighed, "Alfalfa City is too dangerous now, I will escort you away." Knight Fletcher did not answer the last two questions, but his lack of answer had already hinted at the answer. The Earl of Avon struggled to break free from Knight Fletcher and was about to go back. "No. I can't abandon the Pegasus Navy. Sir Earl," bang. In an instant, a loud noise suddenly exploded behind them. A huge grey figure crashed through the wooden wall and rushed towards the Earl of Avon with a huge kite shield in his hand. Knight Fletcher turned his head abruptly and saw a tall armored man dashing toward him like a violent bear. His huge figure shrouded both Count Elvin and himself in it. "Get out of the way." Sensing the terrifying power of the enemy's charge, Knight Fletcher didn't dare to take it head-on. He quickly pulled Count Elvin and rolled forward. Boom! The stone ground burst open and a large amount of gravel sputtered like bullets. The Earl of Avon was smashed and cried out. Countless bruises appeared on his body. Knight Fletcher quickly stood in front of the Earl of Avon and stabbed his knight's sword towards the gap in the armored man's neck. Clang! The armored man raised his shield and swept it across. The sword in Knight Fletcher's hand was broken and a large number of fragments flew in all directions. Knight Fletcher was sent flying by the huge force of the shield attack and slammed into the wall on the side of the alley. Knight Fletcher spat out a mouthful of blood and could not hide the horror in his heart. The opponent was actually a 6th-grade warrior. "Sir Earl, you must leave." Knight Fletcher knew that he was no match for him, so he immediately cried out in pain. The Earl of Avon was also frightened by this scene. He knew that in the face of such absolute power, he would only be a burden even if he stayed. Without hesitation, he got up and ran away without saying a word. Seeing that his main target had escaped, the armored man was about to chase after him when he heard the sound of the wind behind him. He suddenly turned around and saw Knight Fletcher rushing towards him again. But just as the armored man raised his shield to smash Knight Fletcher suddenly turned sideways and crashed into the wall, causing the armored man to miss. "Come on!" Knight Fletcher taunted. The armored man was stunned. It seemed that he was really angered by Knight Fletcher's behavior. He no longer chased after the Earl of Avon. Instead, he raised his shield and chased into the house. Knight Fletcher's heart relaxed, but he also knew that he was no match for the armored man behind him, so he kept running forward. The armored man behind him was not slow either. He held a giant kite shield in his hand and rampaged. Even if it was a solid stone wall, it would be like tofu when he casually bumped into it. It was easy to break a hole in it. That aura was simply capable of killing anyone who stood in his way, even gods who stood in his way. Knight Fletcher saw that the armored man behind him was getting closer and closer. He knew that he would not be spared. He was about to turn around and fight with all his might, but when he broke through the wooden door in front of him and rushed to the opposite street, he unexpectedly encountered more than a dozen soldiers wearing the uniform of the Pegasus Navy. Knight Fletcher was overjoyed and shouted, "Help me stop the armored man behind me." However, these soldiers did not move. They looked at Knight Fletcher as if he was an idiot. Knight Fletcher thought that they did not recognize him. Just as he was about to speak again, he suddenly felt a piercing sound behind his head. He did not have time to think and quickly rolled on the ground. Crack! The sound of bones cracking could be heard as Knight Fletcher's entire arm was broken. He screamed miserably as he rolled on the ground a few times. However, he saw the armored man slowly walking over. Enduring the severe pain, Knight Fletcher once again shouted to the soldiers, "Help me. I am the guardian knight of the Earl of Avon." However, the soldiers suddenly burst into laughter and said, "Sir Knight, look at us again. Who are we?" Knight Fletcher realized that these soldiers did not have the temperament of a soldier at all. The military uniform on their body did not fit at all. He guessed that they just robbed it. Knight Fletcher's heart was completely desperate. He looked at the armored man who was approaching him step by step. He no longer struggled and fell to the ground. Before he lost consciousness, his last thought was, the Earl should have escaped, right? The Earl of Avon looked at the armored man in front of him and knew that he would not be able to escape. "You are Earl Angeli's men, right?" The Earl of Avon asked in a deep voice. However, the armored man opposite him did not respond. He only approached the Earl of Avon step by step, slowly but firmly. "Can I see him?" The Earl of Avon asked again. The armored man still did not speak. The Earl of Avon snorted and said coldly, "As the descendant of the Paladin family, the Earl of the Empire of Light, I now officially surrender to you. Please give me the treatment I deserve as a prisoner." The armored man still ignored the Earl of Avon. He did not know whether the Earl of Avon understood the treatment that an Earl of the Empire of Light should receive as a prisoner. The Earl of Avon slowly stepped back until his back hit the wall. His face was mixed with anxiety and arrogance as he looked at the armored man's hand that was reaching for him. At the moment when the armored man was about to touch the Earl of Avon's body, the magic staff hidden in the Earl of Avon's sleeve suddenly shook out. A string of obscure elvish words came out of the Earl of Avon's mouth. Wisps of green smoke rose from the armored man's feet and wrapped around his body like poisonous snakes. The Earl of Avon was happy and turned around to run. But the next second, the smile on his face froze. This was because the armored man did not seem to be affected at all. He was still holding on to the Earl of Avon's collar. Damn it! Where did the Angeli family get so many experts? Before he was knocked unconscious, the Earl of Avon cursed helplessly and angrily. In fact, when the Earl of Avon was taken away by Knight Fletcher, the Pegasus navy gathered near the port had already lost their desire to resist. Their leader had run away, and they were attacked from both sides. They could not see any hope of victory. So, some gave up resistance and surrendered. Some snatched a surviving ship and escaped on the water. Some tried to break through the Alfalfa Brotherhood's line of defense and escape on land. Of course, there were always some loyal and brave soldiers who were willing to fight to the last moment for the House of St. Prospero. But unfortunately, their battle was destined to be meaningless. The Pegasus navy had completely collapsed. It was not until the sky gradually brightened that the battle that lasted for a night finally subsided. Chapter 430. Alfalfa City's North District, City Lord's Mansion. The candlelight on the table was swaying in the night wind, just like City Lord Ron Lute's restless mood. The commotion on the other side had already woken Ron up, but he didn't know what was going on over there and didn't dare to make any moves for fear of attracting trouble. Asterisk thump 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 asterisk. Amid the sound of footsteps, Jason Lute ran in while panting. He couldn't suppress the joy on his face as he shouted, "You're right, Father. The Pegasus navy is fighting among themselves." Ron stared at him and asked anxiously, "What do you mean by fighting among themselves?" "Anyway, their warships are fighting among themselves. A large number of warships have been burned to ashes by those terrible green flames. Moreover, the people I sent to the other side reported that the Alfalfa Brotherhood is also looting a burning house. It's already a mess over there." Looking at his son who was gloating, Ron calmed down and asked doubtfully, "How could this be? Why did the Pegasus navy have internal strife? Why did the Alfalfa Brotherhood betray the eastern region?" Jason scratched his head and said hesitantly, "Could this be Earl Angeli's plan?" Ron frowned even more. "Then why didn't we get any information?" Jason didn't speak. This was an awkward topic. If it was really Earl Angeli's plan, then the Lute family, who was nearby and also the city lord of Alfalfa City, didn't get any information. This was really embarrassing. The room was silent for a long time. Jason couldn't help but break the silence and suggested, "Father, why don't we also send people to the other side? Maybe we can even get a share of the credit." Ron rolled his eyes and interrupted angrily, "Who should we send?" "You." Jason shrunk his head and didn't dare to speak. Ron glared at his son in disappointment, but he didn't make things difficult for him. He knew very well that with the Lute family's current strength, if he really sent his son to the other side, it would be sending him to his death. But if he really didn't do anything and let this wonderful opportunity to make the Lute family rise again slip away, he was very unwilling. Looking at the opposite shore where the flames soared into the sky, Ron hesitated for a long time before finally making up his mind. He turned around and asked, "How many warships can we take out now?" 5. Thinking about the configuration of the Pegasus navy, Jason said guiltily, "Also, they are all small boats with a displacement of less than 100 tons, Ron paced back and forth in the hall anxiously. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, "It's fine. The Pegasus navy is too busy to take care of themselves right now, so they might not guard against us." Jason said hesitantly, "Father, but with our family's private army, even if we cross the Nushiri River, we won't be able to gain a foothold on the other side, no. Of course, we don't want to occupy the opposite shore." "Then what is our goal?" "Earl of Avon." Ron said in a deep voice. "I know that the Earl of Avon is on the other side of the river. As long as we catch him in the chaos, there will be hope for the revival of the Lute family." Jason's eyes also lit up. He seemed to think that this proposal was quite feasible. But just as he was about to agree, he suddenly felt an earthquake-like tremor. At first, he didn't care about it. He thought it was an explosion on the other side of the river. But this tremor was not explosive. It was continuous and getting stronger and stronger, as if thousands of wild beasts were rushing into Alfalfa City. "Father! Father!" Jason was obviously frightened. Ron didn't panic. Instead, he was somewhat relieved. But there was some regret. He said, "It's the cavalry. It should be the blood cavalry entering the city." Blood cavalry? Count Angeli? Jason finally realized what was going on. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the butler hurriedly running into the room and reporting, "Master, the blood cavalry is entering the city. Quick! Line up and greet them." As he said, Ron rushed out. Jason also hurriedly followed. When the father and son walked out of the mansion, they saw a long fire dragon appearing at the end of the street. Soon, a group of cavalrymen holding torches approached the city lord's mansion. Ron straightened his collar and wanted to ask, but he found that the other party didn't mean to slow down at all. They still flew past the mansion like lightning. The wind and waves brought by the wind blew Ron's well-groomed hair. Just when he was embarrassed, a blood cavalry officer finally stopped in front of the mayor's mansion and asked, "Are you Lord Ron?" "Yes, General." Ron hurriedly responded, "Where is the Earl?" The officer didn't answer Ron's question. Instead, he said lightly, "The blood cavalry is going to cross the river in Alfalfa City. I'm here to inform you." Ron saw that the other party was unwilling to reveal the whereabouts of Earl Angeli. He was annoyed, but he didn't dare to show it. He could only keep nodding and said, "Okay, okay. Is there anything I can do to help?" The officer glanced at Ron expressionlessly and said, "Just gather as many ships as possible." "Okay." On the New Shui River. Earl Hall stared at the fire that was gradually extinguishing not far away. His face was solemn and dignified. The heavy battleships of the House of St. Prospero had all turned to ashes in the terrible wildfire, and the rest of the light battleships were mostly buried under the water. Although the remaining battleships were still wandering around like flies, they could no longer change the situation of the battle. In this battle, the Hall family had won a decisive victory. From today on, the Hall family had the final say on the New Shui River. But even so, Earl Hall didn't have much joy of victory in his heart. The footsteps behind him interrupted Earl Hall's contemplation. He thought it was Marquis Vincent, so he quickly turned around and was about to greet him. But after seeing the face of the person, he suddenly froze on the spot. "Earl Angeli. Earl Hall, your fleet has truly broadened my horizons." Looking at the smiling Colin, Earl Hall snapped back to his senses and hurriedly bowed. "Your lordship, you flatter me." Although he was somewhat puzzled as to how Colin had boarded the ship, Earl Hall didn't ask this question. He secretly guessed that this young Earl of the northern frontier had probably been on the ship last night, hiding in the shadows to monitor his every word and action. If he showed the slightest hesitation or weakness, the other party would probably join forces with Marquis Vincent to overpower him and personally command the Hall family's fleet. Colin looked at Earl Hall, who had a complicated expression, and thought that he was worried about the family members left behind in White Dew City, so he comforted him. "Don't worry. As long as your fleet sends the blood cavalry across the New Shui River, I guarantee that your family won't suffer any harm." Earl Hall immediately thought of the condition that Marquis Vincent had told him about in the northern frontier, a change of duke in the eastern region. For a moment, the old Earl's emotions were extremely complicated. But he also understood that it was impossible for him to retreat. "Yes, your lordship. The Hall family's fleet is very happy to serve you." Chapter 431. When the first glimmer of dawn sprinkled on the surface of the raging water river, Colin finally set foot on the land of the eastern region. This was the first time he came to the east of the raging water river. Looking at the broken city in the mess left behind after the battle, Colin curled his lips and felt a little bored. Walking down the trestle and stepping on the wet and soft ground of the port, traces of blood seeped out with every step. It seemed that the soldiers of the Pegasus Navy who were unwilling to die were stubbornly cursing Colin, the demon who destroyed the biggest barrier of the eastern region. "Sir Count. Orlando, who had been waiting on the shore for a long time, quickly greeted Colin and saluted him. Colin nodded with a smile and said, "Mr. Orlando, you've worked hard. It's my honor to serve Sir Count." Colin looked at the president of the Alfalfa Brotherhood with a flattering face and couldn't help but begin to think about how to arrange this person. After the betrayal of the Hall family, the raging water river was no longer a natural moat for the northern frontier. Therefore, Alfalfa City naturally became Colin's possession. Of course, he couldn't let the dregs of the Alfalfa Brotherhood wantonly trample on it. Forget about the rest of the Alfalfa Brotherhood, but Orlando was indeed quite capable. Colin intended to incorporate him and use him elsewhere. However, this matter wasn't urgent. Colin's primary goal now was White Dew City. Earl Hall, how long will it take to transport all the blood cavalry across the river? Sir, if we follow your request and don't bring logistical supplies, we can probably complete the transport before sunset tomorrow. Tomorrow? Colin frowned and said with dissatisfaction, "That's too slow." Earl Hall thought for a moment and suggested, "Sir, if we can build a pontoon bridge over the river, the speed can be much faster, but what? The pontoon bridge uses transport ships as piers, connected by ropes, and planks on top of them. However, if we want to ensure the efficiency of the pontoon bridge, especially for cavalry, we need a large number of planks to reinforce it. I'm afraid that we won't be able to find so many planks in a short period of time." Colin stroked his chin. He wanted to suggest dismantling the decks of a few battleships, but he realized that the decks were probably not that easy to dismantle. "Sir, we can demolish the houses." Colin glanced at the other party and did not hesitate. He immediately ordered, "All right. Orlando, you will be in charge of this matter. Tell the residents in the city that I will help them rebuild the demolished houses later. If they are willing to take the initiative to help, I will also reward them." "Yes, sir." After telling the blood cavalry about the river crossing, Colin came to a red-walled building near the port alone. The two armored men guarding the door immediately bowed to Colin when they saw him. Pushing open the door, Colin saw the Earl of Avon standing by the window, staring in the direction of the new Shuai River in a daze. "Earl of Avon, long time no see." Hearing Colin's voice, the Earl of Avon looked back. Seeing that there was only Colin, he turned back and continued to stare out of the window. "Why don't I see my dear brother?" Colin pulled a chair and sat down. "Marquis Vincent has returned to White Dew City. I'm sorry that he can't come to see you." The Earl of Avon was stunned. Then he sneered and said, "Can't or dare not." Colin did not answer this question. Instead, he said to himself, "Earl of Avon, although you have opposed me many times, I have decided to release you unconditionally because we are both earls of the Empire, unconditionally." The Earl of Avon interrupted with a sneer, "Why are you so kind? Or do you have a bigger plan?" Colin shrugged and smiled. "What's wrong? I'm letting you go, but you don't want to leave." The Earl of Avon turned around and looked at Colin with a burning gaze. "If you can answer one of my doubts, then I'll leave." Colin was so angry that he was amused. He said, "What? Are you saying that I'm begging you to leave?" The Earl of Avon crossed his arms and put on a shameless look, as if to say, "If you don't answer my doubts, I'll stay here." Colin was a little speechless. He could only ask, "What doubts do you have?" The Earl of Avon smiled and asked, "My doubts are, why is Vincent willing to cooperate with you?" Colin smiled and said half of the truth, "Because I made him believe that you wanted to kill him." "I wanted to kill him?" The Earl of Avon was stunned for a moment, then he came to a realization. "So that's how it is. It's because of the assassination he encountered in the half-elven palace, right? It should be your arrangement, right? Then you shifted the blame to me." Colin nodded and did not deny it. "That's right. But what's the use of you asking about this now? Even if you tell Vincent about this, he can't turn back. What's more, do you really not want to kill your brother?" The Earl of Avon flatly denied, never. Colin smiled coldly and asked, so, if I hadn't come to Alfalfa City, but had continued to follow the agreed-upon redemption plan and released Marquis Vincent, would you have given up on your plan and allowed Vincent to safely return to the eastern region? The Earl of Avon's eyes flashed, but he did not speak. Colin said on his behalf, you won't. You've already paid so much for this. You broke off your marriage with Prince Lacy's daughter and married Count Bruggen's daughter instead. You also forced Count Hall into a dead end. Under such circumstances, you can no longer turn back. If Marquis Vincent successfully returned to the eastern region, how would you deal with it? When you let the Duke of St. Prospero believe in Vincent's death, he was already dead. Even if he appeared in front of you again, you would definitely kill him with your own hands. So, Evan, don't pretend to be brothers with me. I didn't frame you unjustly. The Earl of Avon exhaled a turbid breath and said softly, you're right. Before I heard the news of my brother's death, I really didn't have the intention to kill him, but after that, in fact, I thought about it. If the news of Fiennes Viscounts was wrong, if my brother was not dead. But as you said, I can no longer turn back. The House of St. Prospero can no longer play with the nobles of the eastern region. So, my brother must die. Colin smiled slightly and said, Earl of Avon, in fact, if you weren't greedy for the inheritance of the Duke of the Eastern region this time, you might not have fallen into my trap so easily. The Earl of Avon nodded in agreement and said, that's right. I was greedy. Colin stood up from his seat and said, okay, have you thought it through? If you have, then get out of here. I don't want to raise another idle person. The Earl of Avon smiled and pointed to the new Shuai River outside the window and asked, Your Excellency, you're letting the Blood Cavalry cross the river now. Do you still want to continue attacking the eastern region? Can't I? But the orcs are about to invade. I'm afraid His Majesty's war mobilization order is already on the way. As long as it hasn't been sent to me yet. Colin said coldly. The Earl of Avon chuckled and said, well, then I wish you good luck. After saying that, he walked out. Outside the door, the Earl of Avon saw a person lying at the door. At the same time, Colin's voice sounded from behind, oh, by the way, this is your knight, right? Take him back with you. Don't let him die here. Only then did the Earl of Avon recognize that the person on the ground was his guardian knight, Fletcher. He hurriedly ran over and found that the other party was still breathing, but unconscious. Earl Angeli, thank you for your hospitality this time. If there's a chance in the future, I'll definitely repay you double. Colin laughed and didn't care about the threat in the other party's words. Get out. Chapter 432. The first glimmer of dawn slowly shone from the east, gently but firmly tearing apart the darkness that shrouded the earth. The hazy light reflected the frost on the ground, flickering with a cold light. The early morning of late autumn already had the chill of winter. But as the sun gradually rose, the frost on the grass and trees melted into round dewdrops, on the verge of falling. Suddenly, the earth trembled slightly. All the grass and leaves began to sway, and the sparkling dewdrops dripped down. The trembling of the earth became more and more intense. In the end, even the grass and leaves were completely broken and fell helplessly, following the footsteps of the dewdrops and merging into the embrace of the earth. Thud thud thud, it was as if rolling thunder had exploded the earth, or as if a flood had surged. The withered weeds and broken gravel on the ground shook and danced. Scarface, who was preparing to go into the mountains to chop firewood, stood foolishly at the entrance of the village. He was completely at a loss after being frightened by the commotion. Run! Run! Fortunately, the villagers' shouts woke Scarface up. He quickly turned around and ran home. Scarface! Come back quickly! Seeing his grandfather standing at the door waving at him, Scarface immediately sprinted. His young body exploded with astonishing speed, and he drilled into the house like a cheetah. The old man hurriedly closed the door and turned around to instruct his grandson, if someone comes in later, don't make a move. Do you hear me? Scarface was still gasping for breath, and he only nodded blankly. The commotion outside the house became louder and louder, and the trembling of the earth became more and more intense. Driven by curiosity, Scarface opened the window slightly and looked outside. Then, he saw countless black shadows appear on the horizon, filling up the entire earth without leaving a single gap. The weather changed, and even the rising sun seemed to be covered by that flag. Cavalry! Scarface cried out in alarm. That's right, there were cavalry outside. A dense horde of cavalrymen rushed over like an avalanche. That's right, it's cavalry, and it's the cavalry from the northern frontier. The old man said with a grave expression. Scarface scratched his head, and his simple and honest ugly face was full of confusion. He asked, "Grandfather, why would the cavalry from the northern frontier appear here? Didn't a few deserters from Alfalfa City come to the village yesterday? I heard that Count Angeli had already led the blood cavalry to cross the river in the northern frontier. I didn't believe it at first, but now it seems that the news should be true. Where is the Heavenly Horse Navy of our eastern region? Why would they let people from the northern frontier cross the river? It seems that there was a rebellion within the Pegasus Navy, which gave the northern frontier an opportunity. Then what should we do?" The old man sighed and the wrinkles on his face were all squeezed together. He said helplessly, "What else can we do? Accept your fate. I only hope that the people of the northern frontier won't go too far, considering that we're all citizens of the empire." Looking at his disgruntled grandson, the old man reminded him again, "Remember, if someone comes in later, let them take whatever they want. Don't stop them. Do you understand?" "Understood," Scarface replied in a muffled voice. The sound of horse hooves outside the house was getting closer and closer. Scarface was lying on the windowsill. Through the gap in the window, he could clearly see the tall horses rushing into the village, as well as the armored soldiers on the backs of the horses. In addition to fear, Scarface's eyes also revealed an uncontrollable look of envy. Because of his tall and strong body, the villagers said that Scarface was a natural warrior. Scarface himself also had the idea of joining the army a long time ago, but unfortunately, his grandfather didn't allow him to join the army. This was because his son, Scarface's father, was a member of the Heavenly Horse Army. However, last year, he followed Marquis Vincent on an expedition to the Half-Elf Kingdom and died in Silvermoon City. One must know that Scarface's father was the pride of this small village when he was alive. He was a rank 3 warrior and a member of the House of Saint Prospero's army. In such a small village, he was definitely a dragon among men. But even so, he died just like that. The cruelty of war made the old man's heart tremble. No matter what, he didn't want to send his grandson to the battlefield. Bang! The wooden door was violently kicked open, and 2 fierce-looking soldiers walked in. Scarface hurriedly shielded his grandfather behind him and looked at the soldiers warily. "Where is the food hidden?" Scarface clenched his fists, but he felt his grandfather pulling on his clothes tightly. Thus, he could only suppress the anger in his heart and point to the corner of the wall. The soldiers walked over and took out what they wanted from an old wooden box. They didn't make things difficult for the grandfather and grandson and immediately walked out. After they left, Scarface rushed to the corner and rummaged through the wooden box. His gloomy face immediately showed some surprise. "Grandfather, they actually left half of it for us. Sigh, looks like the people of the northern frontier still have some conscience. If we eat the rest sparingly, we should be able to survive this winter." Before he could finish speaking, another figure appeared at the door. His entire body was covered in bright red armor, only revealing a pair of emotionless eyes. Scarface panicked and hurriedly said, "You've already been here once. Grandfather and I are the only ones left." Scarface. Grandfather anxiously kept shooting glances at his grandson, afraid that he would do something stupid. Scarface could only shut up, but his body still blocked in front of the wooden box and didn't move away. However, the armored man at the door had no intention of coming in. He only stared at the grandfather and grandson in a daze, as if he was stupid. Scarface also straightened his neck and looked at the armored man, but as time passed, the vigilance in his eyes slowly dissipated. Instead, a trace of doubt appeared. Why was this person's gaze somewhat familiar? Grandfather also saw that the atmosphere was not right and carefully asked, "Sir, is there anything I can help you with?" Only then did the armored man come to his senses, but he didn't say anything. He only threw down a bag of food and then turned to leave. Grandfather and grandson were left looking at each other in dismay. At the entrance of the village, Colin stood on his horse and fell into deep thought as he watched the blood thrall walk out of Scarface's house. This blood thrall used to be a third-rank warrior in the Sky Horse Legion. Colin didn't know his name or past, but now it seemed that he probably came from this village. And the reason why he acted so strangely just now should be because he saw his family. Colin always thought that blood thralls had no self-consciousness, but now it seemed that this was not the case. Of course, this residual consciousness was not strong and would not affect Colin's control over them. For example, now, under Colin's command, the blood thrall returned to Scarface's house and took away the bag of food that Scarface had just left. This gave Colin a wake-up call. If even a blood thrall could feel pity for his family, then what about a blood descendant who had self-consciousness in the first place? When Colin forced Count Schultz to betray her husband in Swan City, he wanted to see if a blood descendant would disobey his order when there was a conflict of interest. However, although the experiment was successful, Colin felt that Count Schultz might have known that the bloody cavalry was hiding outside the city and knew that he couldn't fight against Colin, so he simply betrayed her husband. Then, if a blood descendant found a way to fight against Colin, or even a chance to get rid of Colin's control, would he continue to disobey his own interests and obey Colin's orders? Thinking of this, Colin suddenly felt that this blood descendant, Marquis Vincent, should be able to give him a clear answer in this trip to the eastern region. Chapter 433. Linshui City was not near the water. It was still hundreds of kilometers away from the Raging Water River, but 500 years ago, the Raging Water River did pass through Linshui City. However, due to an earthquake, it changed its course and Linshui City became unworthy of its name. In the back hall of the city lord's mansion, there was a scene of singing and dancing. The young and beautiful half-elf dancers were graceful and charming. Their eyes were full of flirtatious glances, which caused a burst of excited cheers, pushing the atmosphere of the banquet to the climax. Viscount Jacques, the lord of Linshui City, was sitting at the head of the table, looking at the half-elf dancers in the field with drunken eyes, shaking his head along with the rhythm of the music, full of interest. But unfortunately, there were always some untactful people who wanted to disturb his mood. Sir Viscounts, Sir Viscounts. Viscount Jacques looked at Knight Palin in front of him and asked with a frown, "What's the matter?" "Sir, there was a group of deserters from Alfalfa City just now, and according to them, the bloody cavalry has already crossed the river." "Knight Palin, you believe the words of deserters? With the Pegasus Navy, tell me, how did the people of the northern frontier cross the Raging Water River? Also, didn't I ask you to send someone to confirm? Did you send anyone?" "Of course, I sent 3 batches. But until now, none of them have returned. Isn't it at least 3 days from here to Alfalfa City? How can it be so fast?" "But sir, there are already so many deserters in Linshui City, which means that something must have happened in Alfalfa City. We should prepare early. Didn't I already send a letter to White Dew City? And aren't you also reorganizing the family army and preparing for battle at any time? What else do you want?" "Sir, to be safe, we should close the city gate." "Close the city gate?" Viscount Jacques hesitated. "Isn't it a bit of a fuss before we get the exact information?" Knight Palin lamented in his heart. The eastern region had been peaceful for too long, and these nobles had long lost their vigilance. He was about to persuade again when he heard a half-elf merchant next to him hurriedly say, "Sir Viscounts, you can't close the city gate. Our caravan still has a batch of goods to deliver to Linshui city today." Viscount Jaga's eyes lit up. One had to know that every time the half-elf caravan passed by Linshui city, they would give him some beautiful gifts. Looking at the enchanting half-elf dancers in the field, Viscount Jaga's heart was burning with passion. He immediately said to Palin Knight, "How about this? Let's wait for Mr. Sasu's caravan to enter the city before we close the gate." Palin glanced at the half-elf merchant cautiously and said, "Sir, I'm worried that it's too late." Viscount Jacques glared at him and said impatiently, "What's there to be unable to do? Do you really think that I don't know how to march and fight? Even if the bloody cavalry really crossed the river, it would take at least 2 or 3 days. Moreover, they would also need to transport the provisions and logistics. It would take at least 5 or 6 days for them to arrive at Linshui city. Just do as I say." "Yes, sir." Palin had no choice but to accept the order and leave. After leaving the city lord's mansion, Knight Palin came to the West City Gate with a heart full of worries. He happened to see a long line of carriages crowded at the gate. It seemed that the half-elf caravan had finally arrived. Palin's heart skipped a beat. He quickly ordered the soldiers to speed up the pace of the caravan. However, halfway through, the caravan suddenly stopped. "What's going on?" Palin stood at the top of the city wall and asked. "Sir Palin, a trailer collapsed under the weight of goods. Clean it up quickly." Palin shouted angrily. At the same time, he had a bad premonition in his heart. He already felt that these half-elf merchants were not trustworthy. After all, the half-elf kingdom was now firmly in the hands of Count Angeli. It was hard to say whether this caravan was a spy sent by Count Angeli or not. However, Viscount Jacques had already been bewitched by these half-elves. Palin could not persuade him at all. Now, he could only hope that the bloody cavalry would not arrive at Linshui city so quickly. However, sometimes, the more one feared something, the more it would happen. Dong, 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 the ground suddenly began to shake. Palin suddenly turned around and saw a thin black line on the horizon. The thin line gradually spread out and turned into a black sea. It was surging toward Linshui city at an astonishing speed. He only felt cold from head to toe. He immediately shouted hoarsely, "Enemy attack! Enemy attack!" The soldiers gathered at the city gate were stunned. They were still unable to figure out what had happened. Those soldiers who were helping to clean up the goods scattered at the city gate were still stupidly carrying the goods on their shoulders. They were dazed as they looked at the cavalry that appeared in the distance. It was not until Palin jumped down from the top of the city wall and kicked several soldiers that they finally regained their senses. Quickly close the city gate." Several soldiers rolled and crawled to the suspension cable. However, at this time, the city gate was blocked by the caravan. They could not close it even if they wanted to. Palin had already confirmed that this half-elf caravan was a spy from the northern frontier. Therefore, he did not show any mercy. He immediately led the soldiers to forcefully drive the caravan away. If the other party hesitated, he would pull out his sword and kill. When they saw blood, the half-elves in the caravan immediately dispersed. However, they left the caravan of goods at the city gate. Palin had no choice but to let the soldiers move the goods away. As for himself, he gathered the guards at the city gate and lined up outside the city, trying to block the blood cavalry. In fact, at this time, there were 1,000 or 2,000 guards at the city gate. Palin felt that with so many people, they should be able to block the blood cavalry and by some time. As long as the city gate was successfully closed, the northern frontier might not be able to take down Linshui city. Cavalry was not good at sieging cities. This was military common sense. Unfortunately, Knight Palin had overestimated his subordinates. The eastern region was too comfortable. The new Shui River firmly blocked the northern frontier outside. The elves hid in the radiant moon forest and there was no trace of them. The army of the eastern region only bullied the bandits and did not fight a few serious wars. Many soldiers did not even practice. Perhaps they were more proficient in using hoes than swords. Therefore, when the vanguard of the Blood Cavalry arrived at the city gate with an unparalleled momentum, the guards led by Palin directly collapsed. They saw the red blood, the ferocious faces, and the ruthless eyes. Then, they were scared to death. They threw down the swords in their hands and ignored Palin's shout. They instinctively turned around and fled into the city. Palin looked at this scene and his heart was completely desperate. However, he looked down at the knight's sword in his hand. The oath that he once swore once again appeared in his mind. Then, this eastern region knight stood alone in front of Lin Shui's city, facing the surging bloody cavalry alone, and roared loudly, "My lord, I'm going to kill you. Come on. Northern Frontier Barbarians." Chapter 434. Chi. A silver light flashed, and a head flew against the wind. While tumbling in the air, the eyes on the head were still staring at the city gate that was still not closed. Snap! The head fell to the ground. Palin Knight's consciousness finally began to slacken, and the last thought lingering in his mind was, Lin Shui's city was finished. The Eastern Region Knight paid the price of his life, but he only delayed the Blood Cavalry for less than a second. The surging cavalry passed over his body and swept toward the open city gate. Inside the city gate, the guards had already fled, and no one dared to stop the fierce cavalry. Colin stopped in front of Palin Knight's body, with admiration and some regret in his eyes. If his head was not broken, Colin would try to turn this brave Eastern Region Knight into a blood slave, but now, it was certainly impossible. The blood race was not a zombie, and they could not come back from the dead. However, he did not leave the body here to be trampled on, but ordered the soldiers to collect it and bury it in the city's cemetery later. This was a real knight, and he deserved such treatment. Later, Colin followed the large army into the city. Even if he had expected the weakness of the Eastern Region army, the situation in the city still surprised Colin. The city's defenders could not organize a decent resistance at all. They were chased around the city by the Blood Cavalry like sheep. Even if there were some sporadic resistance, it was easily suppressed. One had to know that Lin Shui's city was already considered one of the largest cities in this region, yet the city's garrison was actually like this. Moreover, Alfalfa City was too chaotic that night, and many Pegasus Navy escaped. They should have spread the news that the Blood Cavalry had crossed the river, but there was still no preparation here. It was said that the Eastern region had been peaceful for too long, and the military equipment was slack, but Colin did not expect it to be slack to this extent. Sure enough, the invincible foreign patient, Guaheng died. Colin did not encounter any organized resistance all the way to the gate of the city lord's mansion. Looking up at the luxurious city lord's mansion, Colin sneered and ordered, "Break the door." This castellan mansion was actually the castle of the Yaka clan. Although it couldn't be compared with the city wall of Lin Shui's city, it still had some defensive capabilities. More than 10 bloody cavalry soldiers couldn't break open the castle gate in a short time. Colin raised an eyebrow and had the soldiers retreat for the time being. Then, he summoned the blood slave Lucian. This Tier 6 warrior was covered in armor, holding a huge white shield that was almost as tall as him. Facing the castle gate, he did not hesitate at all. His feet left a deep pit in the ground. Boom! Propelled by the powerful reaction force, he was like a cannonball that had been shot out of the barrel as he charged towards the castle gate. Bang! The earth quaked and the mountains swayed. The door collapsed. Without Colin's order, the soldiers of the bloody cavalry immediately filed in. Suddenly, there was a burst of wailing and howling inside. Some of the eastern soldiers wanted to pick up their weapons and fight, but soon they were cut down by the braver and fiercer blood cavalry. As for the Eastern soldiers, they chose to kneel on the ground and surrender. It was difficult for these soldiers, who had not been baptized by the cruel war, to cause trouble to the fierce blood cavalry. Colin dismounted and walked into the castle under the protection of the soldiers. In the castle, there were many people kneeling down, and many injured people were constantly screaming. Colin did not stop and went straight to the inner court. He had already heard the music coming out. It seemed that the castellan was really fearless in the face of danger. Was the castellan deliberately showing such a posture to win his respect, or deliberately showing disdain to provoke him? But when Colin really walked in, the corner of his mouth could not help but twitch. It turned out that they were just too high to stop. Even under the cold gaze of the bloody cavalry, this group of aristocrats in Linshui city still went their own way, doing all kinds of indecent things, unaware of what was happening around them. At this time, a half-elf merchant on the scene pushed away the dancer who was entangling him, came to Colin with a flattering smile, and respectfully saluted, "My lord, you are finally here." Colin coughed a few times, withdrew his shocked gaze, and said, "Are you Mr. Sachs?" "Yes, the motorcade at the city gate was arranged by me." "Are you satisfied?" Colin nodded, pointed to the obscene scene in front of him, and asked, "This is also arranged by you?" "Yes, my lord. I added hallucinogens in the wine, so they can't recover their consciousness for a while." Colin waved his hand in disgust and ordered the soldiers behind him, "Take them away, and come to see me when they wake up." "Yes." After the hall was cleaned up, Colin sat down on the main seat. Sachs quickly asked the maid to serve the red wine. Of course, there was no added flavor. Colin just happened to be thirsty after a long journey. He drank it up, and then said to the half-elf merchant, "Mr. Sachs, I need your help." Sachs immediately replied, "My lord, please tell me what to do." In fact, in the half-elf business circle, Colin's reputation was very bad. Whether it was the forced low price of grain, or the establishment of the half-elf foreign trade company, these made the half-elf merchants very resistant. But the biggest problem of the merchant class was that they couldn't be united. As long as there were enough benefits, it was easy to divide and draw them in. Not to mention, now that Silvermoon City was firmly controlled by the northern frontier, coupled with the tragic end of the legendary half-elf merchant, Javier, most of the half-elf merchants had already recognized the reality, and regarded Colin as a target to cling to. This Mr. Sachs was the vanguard and leader of these half-elf merchants. This time, by helping the blood cavalry to take down Linshui City, Sachs had completely joined the northern frontier's pirate ship. From now on, he could only rely on Colin's thigh. "I need you to help me collect the grain in the city. Of course, all the grain of the Yajia family will be collected. As for the commoners, collect half and leave the other half for them." "My lord, you are so kind. You even left half for the commoners of the eastern region." Colin smiled faintly and didn't explain. In fact, he did this because, on one hand, he didn't want to go too far. After all, it was always a bit unstylish to snatch grain from the commoners. But on the other hand, he actually didn't lack grain. The grain bought from Silvermoon City at a low price, plus the grain bought from the Earl of Avon with bonds, was enough for the northern frontier to survive this year's famine. After entering the eastern region, the reason why he allowed the blood cavalry to wantonly snatch the grain was to create an illusion. The purpose of the blood cavalry entering the eastern region was for the grain. The blood cavalry will help you collect the grain, but after that, your caravan will have to carry out the transportation alone, understand? Understood. Chapter 435. White Dew City, City Gate. The guard stopped the person in front of him and asked in a routine manner. "Name? Where are you from? What are you doing in White Dew City?" That person glanced at the absent-minded guard and said a name, Vincent St. Prospero. "Oh, you have to pay 3 copper coins as entrance tax to enter the city." The guard subconsciously said, but he immediately reacted and finally raised his head to look at the person in front of him in surprise. Marquis. Lord Marquis. The guard finally recognized Vincent and immediately bowed. His exclamation caused a commotion at the city gate. Not long after, the knight on duty at the city gate hurriedly ran over and welcomed Marquis Vincent into the city. Marquis Vincent didn't tarry at the city gate and went straight to White Dew Castle. However, he wasn't fast. He rode his horse and wandered in the city. He wanted to see if there were any changes in his hometown that he had left for a long time, and also to give White Dew Castle some time to prepare. Marquis Vincent was very curious about his father's expression when he saw him later. When he arrived at White Dew Castle, the butler was already leading a group of attendants to welcome him at the gate. "Young master, you are back." Marquis Vincent nodded and dismounted from his horse. He handed the reins to the attendant and asked the butler, "Where is father?" "Old master is in the study." "Do you want to take a bath and change first, or do you want to see old master directly?" "I'll go see father directly." Marquis Vincent took a wet handkerchief from a maidservant and wiped his face before walking to the study. Everything in the castle was the same as before, as if nothing had changed. However, Marquis Vincent clearly understood that many things had changed since he was captured in Silvermoon City. Although the attendants he met along the way were still respectful, Marquis Vincent could keenly sense that their gazes were a little subtle. Marquis Vincent followed the spiral staircase to the third floor of the castle and stopped in front of the study. He adjusted his collar and knocked on the door. "Knock, knock, knock. Come in." Marquis Vincent took a deep breath and pushed the door open. "Father, I'm back." The Duke of St. Prospero, who was playing chess with the Duchess, put down his crystal chess piece and looked up to size up his eldest son. "I didn't expect you to dare to come back." Marquis Vincent smiled faintly. "Father, what are you talking about? This is my home. Why would I not dare to come back?" Sensing the tense atmosphere between the father and son, the Duchess slowly stood up and walked to her son. She reached out her hand to tidy up his messy hair and sighed, "You've suffered in this trip to Silvermoon City." Marquis Vincent's heart warmed, and the smile on his face became more sincere. He said, "Mother, going to Silvermoon City was my own choice. No matter what I experience, I won't hate anyone. Besides, I do need to take responsibility for the failure of this mission, and I won't run away from it. However, I will not allow anyone to stab me in the back." The Duke of St. Prospero's eyes flickered. "Who did you say stabbed you in the back?" Marquis Vincent sneered and said, "Who else could it be other than my good brother Evan?" The Duke of St. Prospero did not speak. He seemed to be thinking about something. The Duchess took her son's hand and had him sit down on the sofa. She poured him a cup of black tea. Hearing Evan's name, she immediately asked, "By the way, where is Evan? Didn't he come back with you?" Marquis Vincent looked at his mother with a wronged expression and said in an angry tone, "How would I dare to come back with him? Who knows if Evan will confirm the news of my death along the way?" The Duchess frowned and reprimanded, "How can you doubt your own brother like this? Did I wrongly accuse him?" Marquis Vincent's face was full of disdain. "Didn't he insist that I was assassinated in Silvermoon City?" The Duke of St. Prospero did not answer this question. Instead, he asked, "How did you come back?" "Of course it was because you used half of the Pegasus Navy's fleet in exchange." Marquis Vincent had a natural expression on his face. "Didn't we agree on the terms? After Count Angeli obtained the battleships, he released me in Alfalfa City. But I didn't dare to meet my good brother who kept cursing me to death, so I took a small boat and went south along the Raging Water River, returning to White Dew City." After listening to Marquis Vincent's narration, the study suddenly fell into silence. After a long while, the Duke of St. Prospero asked, "You don't know what happened in Alfalfa City?" "What happened?" Marquis Vincent had a confused expression. The Duke of St. Prospero picked up a letter from the desk and said, "This is the letter Evan sent back from Alfalfa City. Take a look at it yourself." Marquis Vincent put down his teacup and walked to the desk. He picked up the letter and read it carefully. Asterisk bang. Asterisk, he's slandering me. Marquis Vincent slammed the letter on the desk and shouted with righteous indignation, I don't know what happened in Alfalfa City, and I don't know how it ended up like this, but he said that I colluded with the northern frontier to instigate Count Hall's rebellion. What a joke. Why would I do that? And if that's really the case, why would I dare to return to White Dew City alone? Evan is clearly trying to push the blame for the defeat onto me. The Duke of St. Prospero carefully observed his son's expression, as if trying to find a flaw in it. This gaze obviously angered Marquis Vincent, and he angrily shouted at his father. Father, do you still not understand at this point? This was a conspiracy planned by Evan from the beginning to the end, but he screwed it up because he tried to be clever. First, he made Viscount Finn lie, saying that I had been assassinated in Silvermoon City, so that you would be determined to support him as the successor of the Duke of the Eastern region. Then, he used the excuse of avenging me as an excuse to take revenge on the Eastern region, but in reality, he was wiping out the forces that supported me in paving the way for his future succession. What did he mean by I colluded with the northern frontier to instigate Count Hall's rebellion? He was clearly the one who forced Count Hall to rebel in order to eliminate his dissidents. Father, such a person who would do anything to ascend the throne, framed his own brother, forced Count Hall to rebel, and destroyed the biggest barrier in the eastern region. Do you still want to continue to believe his nonsense? The Duke of St. Prospero did not speak. He just looked at his son silently, unsure if he believed what Marquis Vincent said. After a long while, the Duchess broke the silence. All right, Vincent, you must be tired after rushing all the way back. Go back and rest first. Your father and I will definitely find out what happened in Alfalfa City. All right. Marquis Vincent nodded and then left the study. When the door was closed again, the Duke of St. Prospero looked at his wife and asked, Do you believe what he said just now? The Duchess shook her head and said, No. Chapter 436. In the study. The Duke of St. Prospero looked at his wife and asked, Why? The Duchess smiled gently and said, Intuition. The Duke of St. Prospero was speechless. Seeing this, the Duchess added, We have too little information now. I can't make an accurate judgment of what happened in Alfalfa City just based on Vincent and Evan's one-sided statements. However, if I have to believe one of them, I would still choose to believe Evan. The Duke of St. Prospero raised his eyebrows and said, Just based on your intuition? The Duchess nodded seriously and explained further, Did you notice that Vincent gave off a different vibe after coming back this time? The Duke of St. Prospero thought for a moment and didn't seem to notice anything unusual. He asked, What's different? I can't explain it clearly. I feel like he's a different person. The Duchess frowned and said, But he didn't dare to confront you like this before. That attitude doesn't seem like something a captive who has just been redeemed after suffering a crushing defeat should have. I treated him like that before. He must have some resentment against me. No, it's not resentment. The Duchess shook her head. It's confidence. Confidence? Yes, as if he knows we can't do anything to him. The Duke of St. Prospero laughed self-deprecatingly and said, We really can't do anything to him. Now that Earl Hall has been forced to betray the Pegasus Navy, only Vincent has hope of pulling him back. If we don't want to lose the barrier on the New Shui River, we have to rely on Vincent. The Duchess deliberated and said, But I feel that his confidence doesn't come from Earl Hall. Oh. What else could it be? Don't forget that before this trip to Silvermoon City, not only did Vincent have the support of Earl Hall, but most of the nobles in the eastern region, such as Earl Brugan and Viscount Orston, were also on his side. After Prince Lacy was banished, Evan had almost completely lost the chance to compete with him for the right of inheritance. Under such circumstances, Vincent doesn't have as much confidence as he does today. The Duke of St. Prospero rubbed his chin and seemed to understand what his wife meant. You mean the northern frontier? The Duchess nodded and said in a deep voice, That's right. I don't know what kind of agreement Vincent made with Count Angeli, and what Count Angeli did to convince Vincent to cooperate with him. However, this was the most reasonable guess. After all, the news of Vincent's assassination was not made up by Evan. Viscount Fines had indeed found quite reliable evidence, and I had also confirmed this news in Silvermoon City through the Church of Glory's network. That's why we made up our mind to help Evan take over the throne, and we came up with a plan to take revenge on the northern frontier. But now, it seems that this whole thing was a trap set up by the northern frontier from the beginning to the end. And I'm afraid Vincent is also involved. The Duke of St. Prospero frowned. After thinking for a while, he asked doubtfully, but why would Vincent cooperate with the northern frontier under such circumstances? Although he failed again in Silvermoon City, Evan couldn't threaten his right to the throne because of Prince Rhy. He just had to wait patiently for us to redeem him. Why would he take the risk to cooperate with the northern frontier? Didn't he know that cooperating with the northern frontier would only make him a puppet in the hands of the House of St. Hilda in the future? The Duchess sighed and said, "This is also what I don't understand. That's why I said that I just intuitively feel that Vincent's words can't be trusted." The Duke of St. Prospero also had a headache and pressed the space between his eyebrows. He said, "We still know too little now. If only Evan or Viscount Fines came back." The Duchess walked behind the Duke of St. Prospero and slowly pressed his shoulder with her slender hand. The Duke of St. Prospero let out a long breath and seemed to be more comfortable. After a while, he said, "Now we have 3 things to deal with urgently. First, find Evan and hope that he hasn't been captured by that damn Colin Angeli. Second, find a way to contact Earl Hall and find out the reason for his rebellion and his current position. See if there's any hope of appeasing him and pulling him back. Third, find out the movements of the Blood Cavalry." The Duchess listened quietly and said, "Do you think that the Blood Cavalry will cross the river at this time? But hasn't the Senate already passed the war order issued by Emperor Reinhardt? But it will take some time for the war order to be sent to White Dew City." The Duke of St. Prospero's eyes flashed. "I don't think that young Earl of the Northern Frontier will be willing to hide in Alfalfa City. But the Blood Cavalry only has 20,000 people. Is Colin Angeli still planning to rely on such a small number of people to conquer the Eastern Territory? It's hard to say." The Duke of St. Prospero's tone became extremely cautious. "This Earl Angeli sometimes does things in a bold and unpredictable way. I always think that he's a more dangerous enemy than Marquis Garcia." The Duchess smiled slightly and said, "You actually value him so much? If I remember correctly, this Earl Angeli seems to be only 22 years old, right?" "Yes, he's a young hero." The Duke of St. Prospero sighed and suddenly became somewhat dispirited. "In comparison, whether it's Vincent or Evan, they're too weak. To be honest, I'm tired of watching these 2 boys fight all day long. If it's possible, I don't want to give either of them the title of Duke of the Eastern Territory." The Duchess stopped kneading her hands and lightly hammered her husband's arm. It seemed that she was somewhat dissatisfied with him insulting her 2 sons like this. But then, she smiled and said, "In fact, if you don't like Vincent and Evan, you have a third choice." "You're talking about Anna?" The Duke of St. Prospero thought of his younger daughter and shook his head. "Anna won't do, she's too naive." "So what? She's already a 5th rank knight, and I can see that she's already at the threshold of the 6th rank. I estimate that she'll advance in 1 or 2 years." "Really?" The Duke of St. Prospero couldn't keep calm anymore. He immediately grabbed his wife's hand and asked in surprise. "Of course it's true." The Duchess had a proud expression. "Such a young 6th rank knight, Anna will definitely step into the Holy Realm in the future. And as long as she can become a holy knight, so what if she's a little naive? With her, will the northern frontier dare to easily cross the New Shui River?" The Duke of St. Prospero's eyes flashed. It seemed that he was really considering the possibility of letting his younger daughter inherit the title. At this moment, a knock on the door interrupted the Duke's thoughts. "Come in." The steward pushed the door open and came in. He handed a letter to the Duke of St. Prospero and said, "Master, this is an urgent letter from Linshui City." The Duke of St. Prospero reached out and took the letter. After glancing through it, he said, I guessed right. The bloody cavalry has indeed advanced to the east and now occupied Linshui City." The Duchess stared at the letter in her husband's hand and asked in a deep voice, "Then, should we temporarily avoid them and wait for His Majesty's war order to arrive and they'll naturally retreat to the northern frontier, or, of course, we should take the initiative to attack?" The Duke of St. Prospero said coldly, "Since they're here, they won't easily leave the eastern territory." Chapter 437. The Alxis Mountains were majestic and continuous, dividing the eastern region into two from the west to the east. Before the decline of the St. Thean family, they occupied the area to the north of the Alxis Mountains. The House of St. Prospero's territory was south of the mountains. Tinder City was located at the foot of the Alxis Mountains. It happened to be the most important passage connecting the north and south of the mountains. Therefore, when the St. Thean family still ruled the eastern and northern frontier, this city could be said to be a battleground for military forces. However, with the unification of the eastern region by the House of St. Prospero, the military importance of Tinder City declined day by day. However, the military influence of Tinder City did not diminish at all. This was because there was an army that was known as the strongest army in the eastern region, the Tinder Army. The most prominent feature of this army was that every soldier would wear a tinder flower on their chest. This kind of flaming velvet flower grew in the Alxis Mountains and could only be found in the cliffs and precipitous cliffs above 3,000 meters. It was definitely not an easy task to pick a tinder flower. The young people in the Alxis Mountains were proud to wear tinder flowers. This rare mountain flower had also become a symbol of bravery. There was only one condition for joining the Tinder Army, to personally pick a tinder flower from the Alxis Mountains. Therefore, the quality of the soldiers of the Tinder Army was the best in the eastern region. Although there were only 50,000 of them, they were a military force that no one dared to ignore in the eastern region. Especially after Marquis Vincent buried the Pegasus Army in Silvermoon City, the importance and status of the Tinder Army became even more prominent. However, this army was not the direct army of the House of St. Prospero, but the private army of the Bruggen family. Therefore, when the Duke of St. Prospero learned of the death of his eldest son and was determined to promote his second son, the Earl of Avon, the first thing he did was to let the Earl of Avon be engaged to the daughter of Count Bruggen. After the Earl of Avon fled from Alfalfa City, he rushed to Tinder City as soon as possible. "Father-in-law, I think Colin Angeli is just putting on an act for us." In the study, the Earl of Avon and Count Bruggen sat opposite each other, with the news from the front lines in front of them. Count Bruggen took a sip of his coffee and asked, "Why do you say that?" The Earl of Avon had a serious expression on his face as he asked, "What do you think Colin Angeli wants to achieve the most when he enters the eastern region?" Count Bruggen pondered for a moment and said, "According to the news from Imperial Dragon City, the Senate has already approved His Majesty's declaration of war. Although it will take some time for this declaration of war to reach White Dew City, it won't take too long." In such a short period of time, Colin Angeli didn't have enough time to mobilize the Northern Frontier Army to invade. With only the blood cavalry, the most he could do is plunder. But looking at what he is doing in Linshui City, it seems that he wants to plunder as much food as possible to alleviate the famine in the northern frontier. The Earl of Avon shook his head slowly and said, "No. As far as I know, the problem of famine in the northern frontier has been more or less solved. Moreover, if the blood cavalry really wants to plunder food, why would they leave half of the rations for the civilians in Linshui City? So I think that this is actually Colin deliberately acting for us to see. He wants us to underestimate his purpose of entering the eastern region." "Then what do you think his real purpose is?" The Earl of Avon picked up a piece of information from the table and said in a deep voice, "It's the Hall family." "The Hall family?" "Yes." The Earl of Avon said with certainty, "The raging water river is the biggest obstacle to the Northern Frontier Army's eastward advance. This time, Earl Hall led his army to rebel, and the Northern Frontier finally has a wonderful opportunity to control the raging water river. But if the Northern Frontier wants to truly control the raging water river, they must completely subdue the Hall family. And to do this, Colin Angeli must rescue the members of the Hall family in White Dew City. Generally, the members of the Lord's family of the eastern region lived in their own territories and only had a temporary residence in White Dew City. But the Hall family was not like this. They started out as merchants in White Dew City. Later, even if they succeeded in entering the noble class, they did not move their family to the territory. Instead, they stayed in White Dew City. It was because of this reason that the House of St. Prospero was very assured of this family that settled the whole family under its nose. It was also because of this that the Hall family became the most trusted vassal of the House of St. Prospero. This played a decisive role in their rapid development later. Therefore, the Hall family could smoothly control half of the Pegasus Navy and not be suspected by the House of St. Prospero. But now, these old, weak, women, and children who stayed in White Dew City became the bargaining chips that the House of St. Prospero used to manipulate Earl Hall. Count Bruggon had obviously thought this through as well. For the northern frontier, the raging water river was definitely the key to their conquest of the eastern region. As long as they completely controlled the raging water river, even if they were unable to enter the eastern region this time because of Emperor Reinhardt's war order, it would be easy for them to come back in the future. Without the raging water river as a barrier, the eastern region was simply a defenseless and delicate girl in front of the northern frontier army. Earl Bruggen frowned and asked again, "Then what method do you think Colin Angeli will use to rescue the members of the Hall family from White Dew City?" The Earl of Avon smiled faintly and said, "Father will definitely understand the importance of the Hall family. He will definitely keep a close watch on the members of the Hall family in White Dew City. If the northern frontier wants to rescue people from White Dew City, there is only one way, to conquer White Dew City." Earl Bruggen was suddenly enlightened and said, "I understand. So Colin Angeli's wanton plundering of food in Linshue City is actually to attract our attention and make us misjudge his true purpose, thus neglecting the safety of White Dew City." The Earl of Avon nodded and said, "That's right, I'm sure that Linshue City is definitely not the main force of the Blood Cavalry." Earl Bruggen stood up and walked to a military map hanging on the wall. He muttered, "Then, where will the real main force of the Blood Cavalry be?" The Earl of Avon shrugged and said, "That's hard to guess. The Alsace Mountains lie between Alfalfa City and White Dew City. If the Blood Cavalry wants to enter White Dew City by land, they must pass through Tinder City. But don't forget that the raging water river is now in the hands of Earl Hall. If he is willing to help the northern frontier, he can completely let the Blood Cavalry bypass the Alsace Mountains by water." Earl Bruggen's gaze swept across the ports along the raging water river, thinking about the possible landing places of the Blood Cavalry. But the Earl of Avon shook his head and said, "Actually, we don't need to figure out where the main force of the Blood Cavalry will land." "Oh. Why?" Earl Bruggen turned back and asked in confusion. The Earl of Avon's eyes were cold and said in a deep voice, "Because our best target is actually Colin Angeli in Linshue City." Chapter 438. Count Bruggen was stunned for a moment before he somewhat understood what the Earl of Avon meant. When he came back to his senses, he said in disbelief, "You mean, we don't have to care about the main force of the Blood Cavalry? Even if they can break through White Dew City?" The Earl of Avon smiled and pressed his hand down, indicating that Count Bruggen didn't need to be so agitated. Then he patiently explained, "It's not that we don't care at all. We can send a letter to White Dew City to remind Father to be careful of the Blood Cavalry that may arrive. Although the Blood Cavalry is invincible in the field, they won't be able to easily take down White Dew City if we are prepared. That's why I said that we don't have to worry about the main force of the Blood Cavalry. Our real target should actually be Colin Angelo in Linshui City. He used himself as bait to deceive our attention, but what if we can swallow this bait in one bite? After hearing the Earl of Avon's words, Count Bruggen also became excited and excitedly paced back and forth in the study. He also realized that this was indeed an excellent opportunity. Count Bruggen certainly understood how important Colin Angelo was to the northern frontier. The husband of the Duke of St. Hilda, the guardian of the northern frontier, the commander of the Blood Cavalry. It could even be said that the order of the northern frontier was almost entirely maintained by Colin Angelo alone. And the half-elven kingdom, which was also Colin Angelo's back garden. Once this person became a captive of the eastern region, the crisis facing the eastern region would immediately be resolved. Count Bruggen stopped and seemed to have made up his mind. He looked back at the Earl of Avon with bright eyes and asked, "What's your plan?" The Earl of Avon smiled confidently and said, "Since the main force of the Blood Cavalry has gone to attack White Dew City, Colin Angelo definitely won't have many Blood Cavalry around him. However, he must be prepared to escape immediately if the situation is not right. The cavalry comes and goes like the wind. If he really wants to leave, it will be difficult to stop him. Therefore, if we want to catch this person, the most important thing is not to act rashly and alert the enemy. We must block all his escape routes and then launch a fatal blow to keep him in the eastern region." Count Bruggen came to the map again and looked at the position facing Waterside City. He frowned and said, "But Waterside City's position isn't deep enough. It's only 2 or 3 days away from Alfalfa City. It'll be difficult for the Fire Velvet Army to cut off their retreat." "No. The Fire Velvet Army must not be moved easily." The Earl of Avon immediately stopped him. "Father-in-law, the Fire Velvet Army is famous, the people of the northern frontier will definitely pay attention to it. As long as we show signs of leaving Fire Velvet City, Colin Angelo will definitely know that his plan has been seen through. If he retreats immediately, we won't be able to catch up with him even if we want to. What do you think we should do then? We need to gather all the lords around Linshui City and discuss a time to send troops together. Only by doing so can we form an airtight encirclement around Linshui City and trap Colin Angelo within." Count Bruggen's frown deepened. "It's not easy to get the surrounding lords to send troops together. They're not my vassals. I'll personally write a letter to persuade them one by one." The Earl of Avon immediately said, his tone full of determination and confidence. Count Bruggen took a deep look at the Earl of Avon and nodded. "All right, then I'll wait for your good news." The Earl of Avon nodded and left the room swiftly without delay. Count Bruggen watched his back disappear outside the door and fell into deep thought. "Father, do you think the Earl of Avon will succeed?" Suddenly, a cold and delicate female voice sounded in the study. Immediately after, a young woman came out from behind the bookshelf with a book in her hands. She was wearing a light green corset dress and her lustrous black hair was casually draped over her shoulders. She had a petite and exquisite figure, but her curves were graceful and well coordinated. Her facial features were delicate but slightly tender. Coupled with her fair and moist skin, she was clearly a 16 or 17-year-old girl. She was young and immature, but already had a budding feeling. Count Bruggen wasn't surprised by the appearance of the young lady. He only said in a helpless and doting tone, "Grace, why are you reading in there without making a sound?" Grace giggled and stretched her back. Her face was full of mischief. "I saw that Father and Evan were so engrossed in their conversation, so I didn't want to disturb you." Count Bruggen smiled mischievously and said, "Is that so? I thought you couldn't help but want to secretly observe your fiancé." A blush rose on Grace's fair and pretty face. She avoided her father's burning gaze and trotted to the chair behind the desk to sit down. She picked up the wax seal and played with it as she changed the topic. "Father, you still haven't answered my question just now." "What question?" Grace rolled her eyes adorably and had no choice but to repeat herself. I asked you just now, do you think it's possible for the Earl of Avon to persuade the surrounding feudal lords to send troops to besiege Colin Angeli? Count Brugen smiled and said, that would depend on what promises the Earl of Avon can give them. Grace's bright eyes turned and asked again, what about you, father? If the Earl of Avon persuaded the surrounding feudal lords, would you mobilize the Flaming Velvet Army to help him besiege Colin Angeli? This time, Count Brugen didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat down opposite his daughter and asked with a smile, if it were you, would you help him? Of course I would. The young girl pursed her lips and answered without hesitation. You've already married your daughter to him. The Brugen family can only live or die together with the Earl of Avon. Count Brugen laughed and said, why do I hear so much resentment in your words? Grace puffed up her cheeks and said angrily, when the Duke of St. Prospero sent a letter asking for a marriage alliance with us, I reminded you not to be in a hurry to take a side, but you didn't listen. Great, now there's no turning back. Count Brugen's face turned serious and he said seriously, Grace, you don't understand. Sometimes, if you don't choose a side, it may seem like you can advance or retreat, but in fact, you won't be pleasing either side. The Brugen family controls the Flaming Velvet Army and the House of St. Prospero won't allow us to have an ambiguous attitude. Grace was still unconvinced and pouted. Anyway, I think you've made a bad move. Count Brugen was a little helpless. You don't like Evan, do you? Grace nodded. I originally thought he was a straightforward and interesting noble young master, but now it seems that he's just a cold-blooded politician who only thinks about benefits. Why do you say that? Grace snorted and said, isn't it obvious? He knows that the target of the northern frontier is White Dew City, but he doesn't want to go back to rescue them. Instead, he's racking his brains to come up with a plan to encircle and annihilate Colin Angelo in Linchue City. His reason is so dignified, but in fact, he just wants to use capturing Colin to wash away the shame of his defeat in Alfalfa City. As for the safety of White Dew City, it's not even in his consideration. Do you really want to entrust your daughter to such a cold-blooded and heartless person? Count Brugen sighed and said, Evan has no choice but to do this. If he doesn't seize this opportunity to prove himself again, not only will his inheritance be in jeopardy, but even the eastern region will fall into chaos once again. Our Brugen family has already entered the game, we can only follow him down this path to the end. Daughter, can you understand your father's painstaking efforts? Grace didn't answer this question. She just hugged the sheepskin book and silently left the study. Chapter 439. White Dew Castle, Training Field. When Marquis Vincent walked in, the competition in the field was nearing its end. With a shout, a rich holy light enveloped the field like mercury, and then the 3 knights of the House of St. Prospero fell to the ground in a sorry state. Clap clap clap. Marquis Vincent clapped his hands and walked closer, exclaiming, Sister, you should have already advanced to the 6th step, right? In the field, Anna put away her sword and bowed to the 3 knights in front of her. The youngest daughter of the Duke of St. Prospero was wearing a magic armor made of fine gold. The design of the armor not only highlighted her graceful figure, but also her flexibility. The surface of the armor was engraved with complex magic patterns, looking exquisite and gorgeous. Powerful, beautiful, and valiant, these qualities were perfectly interpreted by this female knight. The charm and aura she displayed made Marquis Vincent slightly absent-minded. Not yet. I always feel like I'm missing something. Anna turned her head and smiled at her brother, replying. Don't worry, you are still young. Marquis Vincent gently consoled her, in this generation of the House of St. Prospero, you are the one with the most hope to advance to the Saint Domain. Anna nodded, not saying anything. She had heard similar words too many times, but every time she heard such words, she would only feel a heavy pressure. The eastern region had not given birth to a saint knight for nearly 100 years, and this embarrassment had gradually become the shame of the house of Saint Prospero. And she, who had shown her talent as a knight early on, carried the hope of the family, and even the people of the eastern region. But this kind of pressure made the young Anna gradually feel breathless. However, Anna was also very sensible. No matter how great the pressure was, she never slacked off. When the other noble ladies were drinking tea and admiring flowers, she was practicing martial arts. When the other noble ladies were dressing up and wearing beautiful dresses, she was always wearing armor. She understood that she could not let down the expectations of her family, she could not waste her talent, but she also hoped that someone could understand her, and not only see her as a tool to achieve the revival of her family. Therefore, Anna thought of someone else when she heard Marquis Vincent's encouraging words. The only person in the house of Saint Prospero who had never said such words to her was her second brother, the Earl of Avon. Not only had the Earl of Avon never said anything like that to Anna, but he also often dragged her around to play. Although the Duke of Saint Prospero had repeatedly reprimanded his second son and warned him not to disturb Anna's training, Anna liked this kind of indulgence because it greatly relieved her psychological pressure. Therefore, Anna and Evan had always been very close. When the Earl of Avon was ordered to go to Silvermoon City, Anna had sneaked out with him. However, after she returned, the Duke of Saint Prospero placed her under house arrest. After such a long time, Anna's young heart had long been restless, and coupled with the fact that she had encountered a bottleneck on the path of martial arts, Anna could not help but ask. "Brother, is there still no news of Evan?" Marquis Vincent shook his head and said, "Not yet. However, I can roughly guess where he is now." "Where?" Anna's eyes lit up, and she quickly asked. Marquis Vincent smiled and said, "Tinder City." "Tinder City?" Anna thought carefully and seemed to have reacted. "Then when will he come back?" "I don't know." Marquis Vincent shrugged. Anna was a little disappointed, but there was a hint of restlessness hidden in the depths of her eyes. Marquis Vincent seemed to have caught this hint of restlessness, and immediately reminded her, "Don't think of running out to find him. Otherwise, if father finds out, who knows how long you will be locked up again." "I won't," Anna said with a little guilty conscience. Marquis Vincent seemed to believe her. He nodded and turned to leave the martial arts field. He went all the way back to his residence. As soon as he entered the door, he saw a small figure running towards him with unsteady steps. "Father." Marquis Vincent smiled and picked up his son, kissed him a few times, and reached out to scratch under his armpits for a while, causing the little guy to giggle and beg for mercy. The Marquise looked at this warm scene with a smile on her face, but the worry in her eyes could not be concealed. Marquis Vincent walked over and kissed his wife's forehead, then ordered the maids in the room, "All of you are dismissed." The Marquise seemed to have realized something. After the maids left, she could not help but ask, "Vincent, is there news of father?" The Marquise's so-called father was Count Hall. During this period, the Marquise had been living in fear. Although there was no conclusion as to what had happened in Alfalfa City, some bad rumors had already spread in White Dew City. Moreover, the Hall family's sudden betrayal and destruction of the House of Saint Prospero's fleet was an undeniable fact. The reason why the Duke of Saint Prospero had not convicted the Hall family was mainly because he was afraid of the Hall family's fleet. The new Shui River was too important for the eastern region. Even if there was a glimmer of hope to win back the Hall family, the House of Saint Prospero would not easily give up. They would not do anything to push the Hall family to the northern frontier. But for the members of the Hall family in White Dew City, this was a torment. Marquis Vincent pressed his wife's shoulder and gently squeezed it, comforting her, "Not yet, but you don't have to worry, I have already made arrangements." The Marquise shook her head and said, "You are hiding everything from me and unwilling to tell me anything, how can I be at ease?" "It's not that I am hiding it from you, but the time is not right. When will it arrive?" The Marquise could no longer suppress her anxiety. "Soon. Marquis Vincent put his son back in his wife's arms and whispered in her ear, "I hope you can go back to the Hall Manor tonight and tell your family that if a knight in red armor comes looking for you, immediately follow him." A knight in red armor? The Marquise's voice was trembling, not knowing whether it was because of excitement or fear. But just as she was about to ask for more details, Marquis Vincent pressed his finger on her lips and said, "Don't ask anything else. Don't ask about anything else. Knowing too much won't do you any good. But, do you trust me?" Marquis Vincent hugged his wife's slender waist and asked in a deep voice. The Marquise stared into her husband's eyes and did not speak for a long time. It was not until her son in her arms could no longer bear the loneliness and began to twist that she came back to her senses. "Of course I trust you." Marquis Vincent let out a long breath and said, "Then do as I say. Rest assured, your whole family will be fine. Okay." Chapter 440. Linshui City. It was late at night. Dozens of candles illuminated the study room. Military reports kept coming in, but Colin didn't read them. Instead, he let them pile up on the desk. Looking at the leisurely Colin, Prince Harrison couldn't help but ask, "Teacher, why aren't you dealing with these military reports?" "There's no hurry." Colin held an old sheepskin book in his hand and read it with great interest. Prince Harrison leaned over to take a look. It was a book titled Radiant Empire's Eastern Aristocratic Heraldry. Studying the Eastern Aristocratic Heraldry at this time, Prince Harrison was a little speechless, but he didn't dare to express it. He could only ask in an inquiring tone, "Teacher, can I take a look at these military reports?" "Sure," Colin said without raising his head. Prince Harrison came to the desk, fiddled with the candlesticks, and then used the candlelight to read the military reports that had been sent over. Princess Judy was also in the study room, but she had fallen asleep on the sofa. Colin was worried that she would catch a cold, so he called the maid to carry her back to her room. The study room was quiet again. Only the soft sound of flipping books and the light sound of burning candles could be heard. Prince Harrison looked at the military reports, and the more he read, the more apprehensive he became. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at his teacher, but he saw that he still had that leisurely look on his face. It seemed that he was really interested in the Eastern Aristocratic Heraldry. He wanted to speak several times, but when he saw how focused Colin was, he swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. Then he anxiously scratched his ears and cheeks, fidgeting. Seemingly noticing Prince Harrison's movements, Colin asked with a smile, "What's wrong?" Prince Harrison hurriedly said, "Teacher, we're surrounded." "Is that so?" Colin still had that leisurely look on his face, as if he wasn't worried at all. Perhaps this calmness infected Prince Harrison, for he also calmed down from his anxiety. However, he still picked up a simple map, ran to Colin's side, and spread it out. Then, he gestured on it and explained. "Teacher, Linshui City is here. Alfalfa City is to the west of us, but now, there are already 3 armies from the eastern region. According to the military report, there are an estimated 60 to 70,000 soldiers. Moreover, we have a cavalry in the north. I estimate that there are no less than 20,000 of them." "Cavalry?" Colin chuckled, "Is there still cavalry in the eastern region?" "The cavalry of the eastern region can't be compared with the cavalry of the northern frontier, let alone the bloody cavalry." "But teacher, we are in the eastern region after all. Wouldn't a lone army deep in the enemy's territory be most afraid of being surrounded?" "Am I already surrounded?" Colin raised his eyebrows. "Almost there." Seeing that Colin was still as lazy as ever, Prince Harrison began to panic again. "Teacher, you see, we'll only get further and further to the east, and there's the Alsace mountain range to the south. Unless we can take down Tinder City, it's a dead end. Therefore, before this encirclement is completely closed, you'd better quickly gather the bloody cavalry and lead the army to break out." "Gather the bloody cavalry?" "Yes. I think there are only about 3,000 bloody cavalry in the city now. The rest of the troops should be scattered around, right? They're not here. Not here. Prince Harrison was stunned. Obviously, he didn't expect to get such an answer. Then where is the main force of the bloody cavalry? Colin turned a page of the book, and said lightly, at this moment, they should have landed at a port in the south of the Alsace mountain range. Prince Harrison opened his mouth wide and looked at his teacher in disbelief. It seemed that he didn't know what to say. Scared? Colin looked at Prince Harrison, who was scared out of his wits, and joked. In fact, Colin didn't plan to bring Prince Harrison and Princess Judy with him when he led the army into the eastern region. However, he couldn't stop the two of them from making a fuss, so he brought along these two burdens. In the beginning, Prince Harrison thought it was just a looting trip of the bloody cavalry. They would rob something near Alfalfa City, and then quickly evacuate. Because the invasion of the orcs was imminent, although the northern frontier controlled the new Shui River, they couldn't march into the eastern region. Therefore, the bloody cavalry couldn't go deep alone at this time. But now, it seemed that this was not the case. Colin was obviously not satisfied with simple looting, and the eastern region didn't seem to want to let the Earl of the northern frontier leave easily. I'm not scared, Prince Harrison said at once. Colin glanced at his student, and comforted him with a smile, don't worry. Even if we are defeated and captured, the people of the eastern region will only send you and Judy back to the Imperial Dragon City respectfully. Teacher, I'm worried about you. Prince Harrison said anxiously. Colin laughed, put down the sheepskin book in his hand, and asked, You're worried that I can't run away? Prince Harrison nodded with a solemn expression. If the bloody cavalry was there, Prince Harrison wouldn't be too worried. After all, the bloody cavalry was so powerful that even if the eastern region set up an encirclement around Linshui City, Colin could lead the army to break out. But if the main force of the bloody cavalry was not there, Prince Harrison was a little flustered. Colin looked confident, and said with a smile, Harrison, in fact, the best strategy in a battlefield game is to take the enemy by surprise. Take the enemy by surprise? Yes. You don't play according to the routine, so that the enemy can't guess your next move and your real purpose. Prince Harrison quieted down, thinking carefully about the meaning of Colin's words. After a while, he looked up again and asked, Teacher, what's your real purpose this time? What do you think? Colin didn't answer, but asked back. Prince Harrison hesitated, and said, It should be the White Dew City, right? You personally acted as a bait in Linshui City to attract the attention of the Eastern Region Army, so that the main force of the bloody cavalry could take the opportunity to attack the White Dew City, right? Yes. Colin nodded. His real purpose was not only this, but he wouldn't reveal more information to Prince Harrison. Prince Harrison thought he understood Colin's overall plan, and couldn't help but say again, Teacher, with all due respect, I think there is a big problem with your plan. Tell me about it. First of all, you personally acted as a bait in Linshui City to attract the attention of the Eastern Region Army, so that the main force of the bloody cavalry could attack the White Dew City smoothly. But if the Eastern Region set up an encirclement around Linshui City and kept you there, wouldn't the loss outweigh the gain? What's more, the main force of the bloody cavalry may not be able to attack the White Dew City smoothly. I know that the Sky Horse Legion was wiped out by you in Silvermoon City, and they have just rebuilt their fighting capacity. But after all, they have a strong city to defend, and the bloody cavalry doesn't carry siege weapons. I'm afraid it's difficult to attack the White Dew City, right? Even if the bloody cavalry really miraculously attacked the White Dew City, they may not be able to defend it with only a few people. So, I think there is a great risk in your plan, but the benefits. Colin nodded and said, Your analysis is reasonable. But some key factors are missing. What key factors? For example, why did I release the Earl of Avon unconditionally in Alfalfa City? Without waiting for Prince Harrison to think carefully, Colin continued to throw out a series of questions. For example, how will Marquis Vincent face the current situation when he returns to the White Dew City? For example, when the Duke of St. Prospero learns that the target of the Bloody Cavalry's main force is the White Dew City, will he ask the Eastern Region Lord to return to support? And if the Eastern Region Lord insists on not returning to support, but insists on encircling me, what will the Duke of St. Prospero think? And the Hall family, the Bruggen family, and so on, how will the Eastern Region Lord choose? Prince Harrison suddenly didn't know how to answer these questions. Colin patted him on the shoulder with a smile and said, "Take a good look. The real battlefield is chaotic and complicated, and it changes rapidly. It's not something you can come to a conclusion by deducing there." "I understand, teacher, I will learn well." Looking at Prince Harrison's serious face, Colin nodded with a smile, but in his heart, he complained, "Learn my ass. You don't have a vampire, you're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.